100 years from now, someone you will never meet will be born. 1,000 years from now, humans who cannot imagine our world will look at stars we also saw, though they will understand them differently. 10,000 years from now, our entire civilization will be archaeology, fragments and ruins studied by beings who may or may not be our descendants. 100,000 years from now, even the ruins will be gone, buried under geological processes that erase all trace of our existence. 1 million years from now, Earth itself may not remember we were here. 10 million years, 100 million years, 1 billion years from now, the universe continues. Stars form and die. Galaxies collide and merge. Black holes evaporate through Hawking radiation. The expansion of space accelerates. All of cosmic evolution proceeds exactly as physics dictates, with no reference to humanity, no acknowledgement that consciousness ever emerged, no special significance granted to the brief moment when matter became aware of itself. And at some point along this incomprehensibly vast timeline, there will be a last human, the final member of our species. They might not know they are last. They might hope that somewhere other humans survive, that they are merely isolated rather than terminal. Or they might know with absolute certainty that they are the end, that no more humans will ever exist after them. Either way, when they die, something that took 4 billion years of evolution to create disappears in an instant. Consciousness winks out. The universe continues, unaffected. Tonight, we trace the path from now to then. We explore how extinction scenarios unfold, what the psychology of finality feels like, and why the universe's indifference is both the most disturbing and most liberating truth consciousness can discover. We will spend time with the last human, understanding their solitude, their perspective, their strange position as the final witness to everything our species accomplished. And through that understanding, we will discover something about our own lives now, in this moment while we still exist. Prepare yourself. This journey ends with you understanding why matching to each other is the only meaning that ever was or ever will be. All species end. This is not pessimism but statistical certainty. Over 99% of all species that ever existed on Earth are now extinct. The average lifespan of a mammalian species is approximately 1 million years. Humans, as Homo sapiens, have existed for roughly 300,000 years. By evolutionary standards, we are young. But youth does not guarantee longevity. Species do not die of old age. They end when conditions no longer support their continuation, whether through environmental change, competition, predation, or in humanity's unique case, potentially through self-destruction. Consider the timeline of extinction. Most species fade gradually, their populations declining over thousands or millions of years as their ecological niche disappears or is occupied by better adapted competitors. A few species end catastrophically, wiped out by asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, or rapid climate shifts. Humans possess the unusual capability to cause our own extinction through nuclear war, ecological collapse, or technological accidents. But regardless of mechanism, the endpoint is the same. Population declines. Genetic diversity narrows. Viable breeding pools fragment. And eventually, individuals become too scattered or too few to maintain a sustainable population. There comes a moment in every extinction when the number of individuals drops below the threshold for recovery. Ecologists call this the minimum viable population, typically estimated at several thousand individuals for complex mammals. Below this number, genetic diversity becomes insufficient for long-term survival. Inbreeding increases harmful mutations. Populations become vulnerable to random fluctuations in birth rates, death rates, and environmental conditions. The species enters a death spiral from which recovery becomes statistically improbable. For humans, this threshold might be higher than for other species because of our complex social structures, technological dependencies, and extended childhood development periods. A population of a few thousand humans might struggle to maintain the specialized knowledge needed for agriculture, medicine, and tool-making. Cultural information could be lost faster than it can be transmitted. The collapse would accelerate not just through biological factors, but through the breakdown of accumulated knowledge and social organization. Imagine humanity reduced to 1,000 individuals. They know what has been lost. They remember a world with billions of people, global communication, scientific understanding. But they lack the numbers to maintain that complexity. Specialists die without passing on their expertise. Libraries decay faster than they can be preserved. Technology breaks down and cannot be repaired. The survivors face a terrible choice. Do they attempt to preserve knowledge for a future that may never come, or do they focus on immediate survival, accepting that much of human achievement will be lost? Now imagine 100 individuals. The group is too small to divide labor effectively. Everyone must know multiple skills. There is no room for pure specialists, no capacity to maintain advanced technology, no possibility of preserving more than a fraction of human knowledge. The survivors live primitively not by choice but by necessity. They are the inheritors of millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization, but they lack the numbers to use that inheritance. They exist in a strange twilight, knowing what was but unable to maintain it, carrying memories of a world they cannot rebuild. At 10 individuals, the situation becomes desperate. Genetic diversity is dangerously low. Every death is catastrophic. The group is too small to defend against predators or survive most disasters. Hope for species recovery is essentially zero. Yet these 10 people still live, still think, still experience consciousness and emotion. They are not yet the last human, but they can see the end approaching. They know, with terrible clarity, that humanity's extinction will occur within their lifetimes, probably within years rather than decades. And then there is one. The transition from 2 to 1 is absolute. When the second to last human dies, something fundamental changes for the survivor. They are no longer part of a community, no longer a member of a social species. They are alone in a way no human has ever been alone before. They are the last. And when they die, humanity ends. What does it feel like to be the last human? Psychology offers some insights, though no human has actually experienced this state. So we extrapolate from cases of extreme isolation and from philosophical thought experiments about existential solitude. The experience would likely unfold in stages, each bringing new realizations and emotional challenges that no previous human had to face. The first stage would be comprehension. The last human realizes they are last. Perhaps they have watched the second to last human die. Perhaps they have searched for other survivors and found none. Perhaps they simply count time, knowing that enough years have passed that no one else could still be alive. This realization brings a unique form of grief. It is not mourning for individuals, though that is part of it. It is mourning for the entire human project, for the species, for the collective endeavor that spanned millions of years from the first tool-using hominids to the final solitary survivor. This grief has no outlet. Grief typically involves social processes, sharing loss with others, receiving comfort, participating in rituals that acknowledge death and provide closure. The last human has no one to share with, no one to offer comfort. No rituals become meaningless when there is no community to perform them for. The grief becomes internalized, a weight carried alone, with no possibility of relief through social connection. The second stage would be isolation awareness. The last human recognizes that they will never again experience human contact. No conversación, no touch, no shared laughter or shared sorrow. Every social instinct evolved over millions of years, Every neurological system designed for interpreting faces and voices and body language becomes useless. The last human's brain is built for social interaction, but there is no one left to interact with. This creates a profound mismatch between biology and reality, between what the mind expects and what the environment provides. Studies of solitary confinement suggest that prolonged isolation causes severe psychological damage. The mind begins to malfunction without social input. Perception becomes unreliable. Emotions intensify and become unstable. Cognitive function declines. The last human would likely experience some of these effects, though their situation differs from prisoners in confinement. Prisoners know others exist even if they cannot access them. The last human knows no others exist. The isolation is not imposed by circumstance but by the fundamental structure of reality. They are not cut off from humanity. They are humanity in its final form, alone and terminal. The third stage would be temporal awareness. The last human recognizes that they are living in the final moments of human existence. Every day is a countdown. Every experience is a last. The last sunrise seen by human eyes. The last meal prepared by human hands. The last thought formulated in a human mind. Time takes on a crushing weight because it is finite and decreasing. The clock runs down not just on an individual life but on an entire species. The last human carries the burden of being the final chapter in a story that spans millions of years. This temporal awareness might produce a desperate urge to preserve something, to leave a record, to ensure that human existence is not entirely forgotten. But who would the record be for? There are no other humans to discover it. Other intelligent species might evolve on Earth or arrive from elsewhere, but they would be alien consciousnesses incapable of fully understanding human experience. The last human might create memorials anyway, driven by psychological need even if rational analysis shows the futility. They might write messages, create art, build monuments, engaging in the human impulse to communicate even when there is no one to receive the communication. The fourth stage would be acceptance. The last human comes to terms with their situation. This acceptance might be peaceful or despairing, resigned or defiant, but it involves recognizing that their death means the end of humanity and that this ending is irreversible. No rescue is coming. No miracle will restore the population. When they close their eyes for the last time, an entire evolutionary lineage terminates. For billion years of biological innovation, from the first self-replicating molecules to conscious minds capable of understanding the universe, ends with one final breath. This acceptance might bring unexpected peace. The pressure to survive for the sake of the species disappears because there is no species to save. The last human exists only for themselves. Their life has no instrumental value, no contribution to make to a larger project. They simply are, for as long as they persist, and then they cease. This can be liberating. Without the weight of species survival, without the expectation of leaving a legacy, the last human might experience a strange freedom. They can simply exist moment by moment until existence ends. But this peace coexists with terrible knowledge. The last human knows what was lost. They remember what humanity achieved, the art and science and philosophy, the loves and friendships and communities. They know that all of it disappears with them. They carry the entire weight of human memory because they are the only remaining repository. When their memory fails, when their consciousness ends, so does humanity's collective self-awareness. The species does not just die physically. It dies as a remembered entity. There is no longer anyone who knows that humans existed. How does humanity reach the point of having a last member? There are multiple paths to species extinction, each producing different scenarios for the final human's existence. Understanding these scenarios helps us grasp the range of possible endings and appreciate that the nature of the last human's experience depends heavily on how humanity declined to that terminal state. One possibility is gradual environmental collapse. Climate change, ecological degradation, and resource depletion could create conditions where human populations slowly decline over centuries or millennia. The technological infrastructure that supports billions of people breaks down. Agriculture fails in many regions. Fresh water becomes scarce. Societies fragment into smaller groups struggling to survive in deteriorating conditions. Generation after generation, the population shrinks. Communities disappear. Knowledge is lost. Humans revert to simpler lifestyles not by choice but by necessity. In this scenario, the last human might be born into a world where humanity is already reduced to scattered tribes. They would grow up knowing that human numbers are declining, that the future looks bleak, that extinction is approaching. They might spend their life searching for other survivors, hoping to find a community, to not be alone. When they finally realize they are the last, perhaps after decades of solitary wandering, they understand that their entire life has been a slow march toward this moment of ultimate isolation. This last human would remember what others told them about the past, stories passed down through generations about when humans numbered in the millions or billions, when cities covered the earth, when technology seemed magical. But these would be distant legends, not lived experience. The decline happened before they existed. They were born into its final stages. Their loneliness is not a sudden shock, but a gradual realization that has been approaching their entire life. When the end comes, it might feel almost like relief, the completion of a process that has been inevitable since they were young. Another possibility is catastrophic collapse. A nuclear war, a pandemic, an asteroid impact, or some other rapid disaster could eliminate most of humanity within days or weeks. The survivors would be those who happened to be in the right place when catastrophe struck, protected by accident of geography, by being in shelters, by simple luck. These survivors would remember the world before. They would know what was lost suddenly and completely. Their psychological situation would be very different from someone born into decline. In this scenario, the last human might be one of a small group of survivors who watched the catastrophe unfold. They saw civilization end in real time. They experienced the terror, the confusion, the desperate attempts to understand and respond to the disaster. Then they lived through the aftermath, the slow dying of infrastructure and hope, the gradual reduction of the survivor population through injury, illness, despair, and the difficulties of living without the support systems that had sustained humanity for generations. This last human would carry intense trauma. They would remember specific people they lost, moments when someone they knew died, the feeling of community shrinking around them. They would have spent years, possibly decades, in small groups of survivors, forming bonds, sharing the burden of survival, and then watching those bonds break as people died one by one. The transition to being alone would be the culmination of repeated losses, each death reducing the circle until no one remained. When this last human realizes they are alone, the shock might be overwhelming. They still remember a world with billions of people. They can recall cities, vehicles, communication networks, all the complexity of technological civilization. But now they stand in silence, surrounded by ruins, with no human voice to answer their calls. The cognitive dissonance between memory and reality creates a particular kind of anguish. They know what was and can see what is, and the gap between them is unbridgeable. A third possibility is that humanity spreads beyond Earth and then experiences extinction everywhere except one isolated location. Perhaps we establish colonies on Mars, on moons of Jupiter and Saturn, on space stations and generation ships. Then some disaster afflicts the species across all these locations. A coordinated attack, a biological weapon that spreads through space travel, a technological failure that affects all the life support systems we depend on. Humanity dies on every world except one remote outpost where a single individual survives by chance. This scenario creates a unique form of loneliness. The last human is not just separated from other humans by distance, but by the certainty that no other humans exist anywhere in the accessible universe. They might look at stars and planets, knowing that humans once lived there, that communities thrived in space, but all are now dead. The cosmos is full of human artifacts, empty habitats and silent machines, but devoid of human consciousness. The last human is stranded in a universe that humans attempted to colonize but ultimately could not survive in. This individual might have access to technology that earlier scenarios lack. They might live in a functioning space station with life support, communication equipment, databases of human knowledge. But the technology serves no purpose beyond keeping one person alive. All the infrastructure built to support space civilization becomes a tomb, maintaining the last human in isolation until the systems fail or the individual chooses to end their existence. The irony would be profound. Humanity reached for the stars, achieved what seemed like immortality through spreading across multiple worlds, and still ended in extinction, leaving one final person surrounded by the machinery of failed ambition. A fourth possibility is biological transformation. Perhaps humanity evolves or modifies itself technologically into forms that are no longer recognizably human. The transformation is gradual, voluntary, seemingly beneficial. Genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, uploading consciousness to digital substrates. At some point, the question arises, are these transformed beings still human? If they have no biological bodies, no DNA connection to Homo sapiens, no shared psychology with baseline humans, are they a continuation of humanity or a new species? In this scenario, the last human might be someone who refused transformation, who chose to remain biologically human while everyone else upgraded or uploaded or merged with artificial intelligence. They are last not because the population declined, but because the population transcended biological humanity, leaving them behind as a relic of an earlier evolutionary stage. Their loneliness stems from being obsolete, from representing a form of consciousness that others chose to abandon. This last human would face a strange situation. Other consciousnesses might exist around them, intelligences descended from or created by humans. But these beings would be incomprehensible, thinking thoughts that biological brains cannot formulate, existing in digital or cybernetic forms that biological humans cannot share. The last human would be surrounded by post-human intelligence but entirely unable to communicate meaningfully. They would be the last of their kind not because all consciousness ended, but because one particular form of consciousness, biological human consciousness, became extinct while derivative forms continued. When this last human dies, Homo sapiens ends, but the universe might not become empty of intelligence. Post-human entities might remember their origins, might honor the last biological human, might preserve recordings or memories of what baseline humanity was like. But these would be alien perspectives, incapable of truly understanding what it felt like to be human. The last human dies knowing that something continues, but that something is not them, not us, not the specific form of consciousness that evolved on Earth and briefly lit up the cosmos with self-awareness. Numbers matter in extinction. The path from 8 billion to 0 can be traced mathematically, and understanding the arithmetic helps us grasp how species ends unfold. Population biology provides equations that model how groups decline, how long the process takes, and what factors accelerate or slow the descent toward extinction. These equations are cold and precise, reducing the tragedy of species death to curves on graphs and values in formulas. But they reveal important truths about the timeline we are exploring. Start with population decline rates. If humanity's population decreases by 1% per year, which is a gentle decline historically speaking, the numbers drop slowly at first. 8 billion becomes 7,900,000,000 after 1 year. The loss of 100 million people is catastrophic on a human level, representing immense suffering and loss. But as a percentage of total population, it is small enough that society might continue functioning. After 10 years at this rate, about 760 million people have died, but over 7 billion remain. The species is nowhere near extinction, but decline does not proceed linearly. As population drops, the rate often accelerates. Infrastructure fails. Knowledge is lost. Medical care deteriorates. Food production drops. Each of these factors increases death rates and decreases birth rates, creating a feedback loop where decline breeds further decline. If the rate increases from 1% to 2% to 4% per year, the timeline compresses dramatically. What might have taken millennia at steady rates could take mere centuries when acceleration occurs. Consider a scenario where population declines at an accelerating rate. Start at 8 billion. Drop 1% the first year to 7,920,000,000. Drop 2% the second year to 7,760,000,000. Double the rate each year and watch what happens. By year 7, the decline rate reaches 64%. The population drops from hundreds of millions to tens of millions in a single year. By year 10, only thousands remain. By year 12, the number approaches single digits. The collapse from billions to one individual could occur within a dozen years if the decline accelerates exponentially. This assumes uniform rates across the entire population, which is unrealistic. In reality, different regions would decline at different rates. Some areas might maintain stable populations while others collapse completely. This creates a fragmented situation where humanity persists in scattered pockets, isolated communities struggling to survive while unaware of other survivors. The total population might drop to hundreds or thousands while individual survivors believe they are among the last few humans alive. These isolated groups face a mathematical problem called the Ali effect, named after ecologist Walter Clyde Ali. Below certain population thresholds, individuals cannot find mates, cannot cooperate effectively for survival, cannot maintain genetic diversity. The Ali effect creates a critical density below which a population cannot sustain itself even if conditions would otherwise support larger numbers. For humans, this threshold might be quite high because of our complex social and technological needs. Imagine a group of 100 humans scattered across a continent. They are too spread out to find each other. Each individual or small family group lacks the skills and resources needed for long-term survival. They might survive years or even decades, but without larger communities, they cannot reproduce successfully, cannot pass on specialized knowledge, cannot maintain even basic technology. These 100 people are functionally extinct. They simply do not know it yet. Their personal timelines continue for years, but the species timeline has already ended. The timing of the last human's life depends on where they fall in this distribution. If they are part of the final isolated group, they might survive decades after the global population drops below viability. They would spend their entire adult life in post-extinction conditions, watching their community shrink, knowing that extinction is inevitable but not knowing exactly when it will arrive. Alternatively, they might be a long-lived individual who simply outlives everyone else by chance. Perhaps they were 20 years old when the population reached 10 people, and they live another 60 years while the other 9 die from various causes. Their longevity determines the final date of human extinction. There is dark arithmetic here. The last human's lifespan becomes the final measure of how long humanity persists. If they live 10 more years, humanity has 10 more years. If they die tomorrow, humanity dies tomorrow. Their continued biological existence is not just their personal survival, but the species' survival. Every morning they wake up is a morning that Homo sapiens still exists. Every night they go to sleep is a night when humanity persists for a few more hours. And when they die, the countdown that began millions of years ago with the first hominids reaches 0. Demographers have calculated average human lifespans under various conditions. In the modern developed world, life expectancy approaches 80 years. In harsher conditions without medical care, it drops to 40 or 50 years. In the scenario of the last human, conditions would be extremely harsh. No medical care, limited food, psychological stress, physical danger from lack of infrastructure and support. The last human might be young when they become last, but their lifespan from that point would likely be short. A few years, perhaps a decade at most. The end, when it comes, would arrive quickly. This arithmetic leads to a disturbing conclusion. The transition from humanity is declining but will persist for generations to the last human will die within the next few years could happen suddenly. A catastrophic event, a cascade of failures, or simply the death of the second-to-last person could create a situation where someone wakes up and realizes they are not just nearly alone but completely alone, and they will remain alone for the brief remainder of their life. The psychological shock of this transition might be as dangerous as any physical threat. Realizing you are not just isolated but are the last human could break the will to survive. Yet the arithmetic also reveals something curious. As long as the last human lives, humanity exists. Even reduced to one, the species persists. Every human accomplishment, every work of art and science, every accumulated piece of knowledge lives on in that one mind. Humanity is not a population count. It is consciousness, the specific pattern of awareness that evolved from primate brains into something capable of understanding the cosmos. As long as that consciousness persists in even one individual, humanity has not ended. The species dies only when that final mind ceases to function. This places enormous weight on the last human's shoulders. They are not just one person. They are humanity in its entirety. Everything the species ever was, every potential it ever had, exists in them and nowhere else. If they remember poetry, then poetry exists. If they remember mathematics, then mathematics exists. When their memory fails, when they forget knowledge or cannot recall details, humanity shrinks. When they die, humanity dies. The arithmetic of extinction culminates in this one individual carrying the full weight of species identity until that weight finally becomes unbearable and they let go. Humans are social animals. This is not metaphor or cultural conditioning. It is biological reality encoded in our neurology, hormones, and evolutionary history. Our brains developed in social contexts, shaped by millions of years of selection pressure that favored individuals who could cooperate, communicate, and form alliances. The neural structures that support language, facial recognition, empathy, and theory of mind occupy significant portions of our cognitive architecture. We are built for connection. Isolation violates our fundamental nature. Studies of solitary confinement in prisons demonstrate how quickly social deprivation causes psychological damage. After just a few weeks of isolation, prisoners begin experiencing anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and cognitive impairment. The damage intensifies over months and years. Personality changes become permanent. The ability to interact socially deteriorates even after isolation ends. Prisoners released from long-term solitary confinement often struggle to reintegrate into society because their capacity for social interaction has been impaired by prolonged deprivation of human contact. But prisoners know others exist. They are cut off from humanity by walls and rules, not by the absence of other humans. If the isolation ended, they could theoretically reconnect. The last human faces a qualitatively different situation. There are no walls to breach, no rules to change. The isolation is absolute and permanent. Other humans do not exist, not behind barriers but nowhere in the accessible universe. The social neural circuits in the last human's brain fire uselessly, seeking connection that cannot be found, generating responses to social stimuli that are not present. What happens to a mind designed for social interaction when social interaction becomes impossible forever? Psychology offers some insights, though the situation is unprecedented. The mind likely undergoes a process called social derealization, where the concept of other people becomes abstract and unreal. After months or years without human contact, the last human's brain might struggle to conceptualize that other minds once existed. Memory of social interaction could fade or seem dreamlike, indistinguishable from imagination. The person might lose the cognitive categories for understanding social relationships because those categories no longer map to any reality. Language would deteriorate. Human language evolved for communication. Speaking requires a listener. Without anyone to talk to, the last human might continue speaking to themselves for a while, maintaining the skill through practice. But over time, the motivation disappears. What is the point of forming sentences when no one hears them? The brain, efficient and adaptive, would likely reduce resources devoted to language production. The last human might find themselves thinking in images, emotions, and sensations rather than words. Their internal monologue could simplify, degrade, or cease entirely. When they finally lose language, they lose access to one of the primary tools humans use for organizing thought and maintaining continuous self-identity. Emotions would become unstable. Human emotional regulation depends heavily on social feedback. We learn to identify and manage emotions through interactions with others who name our feelings, validate our experiences, and provide models for emotional expression. The last human would lose this social scaffolding. Emotions would arise without social context, making them difficult to interpret. Sadness might feel unbearable because there is no one to provide comfort. Joy might feel hollow because there is no one to share it with. Anger might feel purposeless because there is no one to direct it at or to help process it constructively. The emotional instability could lead to psychological breakdown. Without social anchoring, the last human sense of self might fragment. Personal identity is largely social. We know who we are through roles, relationships, and the reflected judgments of others. The last human has no roles, no relationships, no one to reflect them back to themselves. They might struggle to maintain a coherent sense of identity without social feedback. Questions like, "Who am I?" and "What is my purpose?" become unanswerable because identity and purpose are socially constructed concepts that lose meaning in absolute isolation. Studies of astronauts on long-duration space missions, particularly solo missions, provide some relevant data. Astronauts on the International Space Station report that even with regular communication with Earth, the isolation and confinement create psychological stress. During experiments with extended isolation for Mars mission simulations, participants showed signs of depression, irritability, and cognitive slowing even though they could communicate with mission control. The psychological toll of isolation affects even highly trained, motivated individuals who volunteered for the experience and knew it would end. The last human would have none of these supports. No communication with others. No knowledge that the situation will end. No sense of purpose derived from participating in an exploration mission. They would face isolation more extreme than anything humans have experienced before. The psychological damage would be severe and irreversible. But there would be no one to care, no one to provide therapy, no possibility of recovery because recovery requires social reintegration and there is no society to reintegrate into. Yet the last human would still be conscious, still capable of thought, perception, and experience. They would still watch sunrises, feel hunger and thirst, experience pleasure and pain. Their neural circuits might misfire, their cognition might degrade, their sense of self might fragment, but they would remain a conscious being experiencing existence moment by moment. The quality of that experience would likely be profoundly impaired compared to normal human consciousness, but it would persist until biological death ended it. This creates a strange situation. The last human would be the most psychologically damaged human who ever lived, their mind warped by isolation beyond anything evolution prepared for, yet they would also be the sole remaining repository of human consciousness. Everything that makes someone human, the capacity for abstract thought, the ability to feel complex emotions, the awareness of being aware, would persist in this damaged form until the end. Humanity's final expression would be a consciousness crying out for connection in a universe that offers none. If you were the last human, would you have any ethical obligations? To whom would you be obligated? Ethics typically involves relationships, duties we owe to others, principles that govern how we treat fellow beings. The last human has no others, no fellow beings. Does ethics become meaningless in absolute solitude? Or are there still moral considerations that apply even to someone who will never interact with another consciousness? One approach suggests that ethics ends with the end of relationships. Moral philosophy from Aristotle through modern social contract theory grounds ethics in the community. We have obligations to others because we exist in societies where cooperation benefits everyone. We refrain from harming others not just from fear of punishment, but because we recognize that others have interests and welfare that matter morally. The last human has no community, no potential for cooperation, no others whose interests could be harmed or helped. From this perspective, they exist in a space beyond ethics, neither moral nor immoral but immoral, a being for whom ethical categories no longer apply. This perspective offers a strange kind of freedom. The last human could do anything without moral consequence. They could destroy the remaining artifacts of human civilization without committing any wrong because there are no future humans to be harmed by the destruction. They could torture animals without ethical violation because there is no moral community to judge them. They could desecrate sacred sites, burn libraries, smash art because no one remains to care. The absence of others removes the foundation for calling any action right or wrong. But this feels unsatisfying. It seems that some actions remain wrong even without an audience to witness them. If the last humans spent their final days torturing animals for entertainment, something feels morally problematic about that behavior even though no human is harmed and no social norms are violated. This suggests that ethics might not depend entirely on relationships, that there are moral truths or principles that apply regardless of whether anyone else exists to care about them. Perhaps the last human has obligations to the past, to the billions of humans who came before, to the species that spent millions of years evolving consciousness and thousands of years building civilization. These past humans cannot be affected by what the last human does, but perhaps there is still a duty to honor their memory, to preserve what they created, to represent humanity well in its final moments. This would ground ethics not in present relationships but in historical continuity and respect for what was. From this view, the last human should act as a guardian of human legacy. They should preserve artifacts, maintain cultural sites, protect the remaining knowledge even though no one will benefit from this preservation. They should live according to the moral principles that past humans valued, upholding ethics not because it serves any purpose but because doing so honors the collective accomplishment of the species. Their behavior in the final days of humanity should reflect the best of what humans were, not the worst. This perspective has emotional appeal. It suggests that the last human's actions still matter, that their choices carry weight even in solitude. But it also seems to place an enormous burden on someone already suffering from isolation, loss, and the knowledge of imminent extinction. Is it fair to expect the last human to maintain ethical behavior when ethics offers them nothing in return? They will not be punished for wrongdoing. They will not be rewarded for virtue. The universe will not judge them. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, ethics becomes optional when there are no consequences for abandoning it. Another approach considers the last human's own welfare. Even in solitude, they might have obligations to themselves. Self-care, maintaining dignity, acting according to principles that support psychological well-being rather than degradation. This grounds ethics in the agent's own flourishing rather than in relationships with others. The last human might choose to act ethically because doing so maintains their sense of self, provides structure to their remaining life, and allows them to face death with some degree of integrity. This self-directed ethics could manifest in various ways. The last human might maintain daily routines, continue learning, create art or write even though no one will see it, simply because these activities provide meaning and prevent complete psychological collapse. They might treat their environment with care, maintaining gardens or preserving beautiful places, not for future generations but because beauty matters to them personally. They might avoid cruelty to animals not because animals have rights that require protection but because cruelty diminishes their own humanity and makes their isolation more unbearable. This approach preserves some role for ethics while acknowledging that the last human situation is fundamentally different from normal moral contexts. Ethics becomes a tool for self-maintenance rather than a framework for social cooperation. It answers the question, how should I live? In ways that preserve your well-being and dignity, rather than in ways that benefit others. This is honest about the changed circumstances while avoiding the nihilistic conclusion that nothing matters. Yet, even this self-directed ethics might collapse under the weight of isolation and impending extinction. The last human might simply lack the psychological resources to maintain ethical behavior. Trauma, depression, and the dissolution of social identity might make it impossible to care about dignity, well-being, or maintaining humanity in the face of its ending. The last human might survive in a state of psychological bare existence, unable to think clearly about ethics or anything else, simply enduring until biological processes cease. If this happens, if the last human spends their final time in a state of mental collapse, does this diminish humanity's ending? Is there something tragic about the species concluding not with a noble final stand, but with one broken individual unable to appreciate what is being lost? Or is this simply honest about what absolute solitude does to social animals? Perhaps the tragic element is precisely that humans cannot maintain humanity without other humans. We require social connection not just for comfort but for our basic cognitive and emotional functioning. The last human, deprived of connection, becomes less than fully human even while remaining the last representative of humanity. This paradox might be the deepest ethical question the last human faces. In order to preserve their humanity, they need what no longer exists: other humans. They can maintain routines, follow principles, and uphold values, but these are pale substitutes for actual human community. The last human's greatest ethical achievement might simply be continuing to exist, refusing to end their life prematurely, ensuring that humanity persists as long as biological processes allow. This minimal ethical stance, survival despite meaninglessness, might be the best that can be expected from someone in such an impossible situation. Who is the last human? This question, which seems to have an obvious answer, becomes deeply puzzling when we consider how identity depends on memory, social relationships, and narrative continuity. Personal identity is not simply being a biological organism. It is having a continuous sense of self that persists through time, a feeling of being the same person who existed yesterday and will exist tomorrow. For the last human, this continuity becomes fragile. Memory is the foundation of personal identity. You are who you are because you remember your past experiences, your relationships, your choices, and values. Without memory, personal identity fragments. Amnesia patients often describe feeling like different people, disconnected from the lives they no longer remember. The last human faces a unique memory challenge. They remember a world that no longer exists, relationships with people who are all dead, a society that has completely disappeared. How do these memories function when they no longer correspond to any present reality? At first, memories of the past might provide comfort, a connection to when life made sense and loneliness was merely temporary. The last human could spend hours or days recalling conversations with friends, moments of joy with family, experiences from when humanity thrived. These memories would be precious, the only remaining proof that others existed, that community and connection were once real. But over time, the memories might become painful rather than comforting. Every remembered face is a reminder of loss. Every recalled conversation highlights the impossibility of ever having conversations again. The memories preserve the past while emphasizing how irrevocably that past is gone. Memories also decay. Without social reinforcement, without others to help recall details and correct errors, memories become unreliable. The last human has no one to remind them of what actually happened. No one to say, "That's not quite right. It was actually like this." Their memories of other people begin to distort. Did that friend really say that? Or is that a confabulation created by a mind desperate for human contact? Did that event happen as remembered? Or has isolation altered the details? The last human has no way to verify their memories, no way to distinguish accurate recall from imagination. As memories fade and distort, personal identity tied to those memories becomes uncertain. The last human might forget their own name if no one speaks it. They might lose track of their history, unable to maintain a coherent narrative of who they were and how they came to be the last. Personal identity is largely a story we tell ourselves, a narrative that organizes our experiences into a meaningful sequence. The last human story keeps ending the same way: alone, last, terminal. This makes it difficult to maintain the narrative structure that supports identity. Language plays a crucial role in maintaining personal identity, and the last human is losing language. When you think, "I am hungry," or "I remember yesterday," or "I wonder what will happen next," you are using language to organize experience into a coherent self-narrative. Without language, this organization becomes difficult. The last human might still experience hunger, remember the past, and contemplate the future, but these experiences might not cohere into a unified sense of self. They might experience consciousness as a series of disconnected moments without the narrative continuity that creates identity. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called depersonalization, where individuals feel disconnected from their own thoughts, emotions, and body. They observe their experiences as if from outside, lacking the feeling of ownership and agency that normally characterizes conscious experience. The last human, under extreme isolation stress, might experience chronic depersonalization. They might watch themselves going through the motions of survival without feeling that they are actually doing these things, as if they are spectating their own life rather than living it. This dissociation might serve a protective function. If the reality of being the last human is too painful to bear directly, the mind might create distance between awareness and experience, allowing survival without full emotional engagement with the situation. The last human could become numb, going through daily routines mechanically while their conscious self retreats into a protected mental space where the full weight of solitude and extinction cannot reach. But dissociation also represents a kind of death. If the last human loses their sense of self, if they no longer feel like an agent in their own life, then in what sense are they still the person they were? Personal identity has been destroyed even though biological life continues. The body survives, the brain continues processing information, but the I that once inhabited that body has fragmented or disappeared. This raises a disturbing question. Does humanity truly persist until biological death? Or does it end earlier when the last human's identity disintegrates under the pressure of isolation? There is no clear answer. We might say that humanity persists as long as human consciousness exists, even if that consciousness is severely impaired. Alternatively, we might say that severely impaired consciousness no longer counts as truly human, that personhood requires certain minimal capacities for self-awareness and rational thought. If the last human descends into mental chaos, losing language, memory, and identity, perhaps they cease to be a person in any meaningful sense even though they remain biologically alive. This matters for how we think about the timing of humanity's extinction. The species might end not when the last human's heart stops, but when the last human's mind fragments beyond repair. The biological ending is merely the final stage of an extinction that began psychologically when isolation destroyed the last human's capacity for maintaining personal identity. From this perspective, humanity's extinction is a gradual process, not a single moment, beginning when social connection becomes impossible and concluding when biological processes cease. Yet, even a damaged, dissociated consciousness is still consciousness. Even if the last human no longer experiences a unified sense of self, they still experience something. They still perceive colors, feel sensations, have emotional responses, even if these experiences are disconnected and lack narrative coherence. This minimal consciousness might be all that remains of humanity in its final moments, a flickering awareness without identity or purpose, simply existing until it stops. There is something almost beautiful in this reduction. Humanity, which spent millennia building complex civilizations, developing sophisticated philosophies, and creating vast systems of meaning, ends as pure consciousness experiencing the present moment without past or future, without identity or narrative, without any of the elaborations that make human existence distinctive. The last human becomes consciousness in its simplest form, awareness without content, experience without story. And then even that ends. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe began. For the first 9 billion years, no consciousness existed anywhere as far as we know. Galaxies formed and collided. Stars ignited and exploded. Planets coalesced from dust and gas. All the machinery of cosmic evolution operated without any awareness observing it. The universe simply was, following physical laws, creating complexity through gravity and chemistry, accomplishing everything necessary for structure and beauty without a single mind arising to appreciate it. Then, approximately 4 billion years ago, on one planet orbiting one average star, conditions became suitable for life. Simple replicating molecules emerged, evolved into cells, diversified into countless forms. For the next 3.7 billion years, Earth teemed with life, but that life was not conscious in any human sense. Bacteria, plants, simple animals existed and reproduced without self-awareness, without understanding what they were or why. The Earth was alive but not awake. Around 500 million years ago, the first simple nervous systems appeared. Animals developed basic awareness, the ability to sense their environment and respond adaptively. This was a kind of consciousness, but primitive and limited. These early animals experienced sensation and perhaps something like pleasure and pain, but they had no concept of self, no ability to reflect on their own existence, no capacity to understand the universe they inhabited. Humans emerged much later. Our evolutionary lineage split from other apes around 6 million years ago. Anatomically, modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago. Complex language, art, and culture developed only in the last 50 to 100,000 years. This means that for 13.7 billion of the universe's 13.8 billion year history, there were no humans. For all but a tiny fraction of cosmic time, the universe existed without human consciousness observing it. During those billions of years of pre-human cosmic history, the universe was not waiting for humans. It was not developing toward the goal of creating conscious observers. The anthropic principle might explain why we observe the universe to have suitable properties for consciousness, but this does not mean the universe cares about consciousness or requires it for any purpose. The universe existed perfectly well without minds for almost all of its history. It will exist perfectly well without minds for almost all of its future. Consider what this means. Everything that humans observe and understand about the universe, stars, galaxies, atoms, forces, existed before anyone observed or understood them. The cosmic microwave background radiated across space for billions of years before humans detected it. Gravitational waves rippled through space-time for epochs before LIGO measured them. Black holes devoured matter without anyone appreciating their strangeness. The universe was doing all of this whether or not consciousness existed to notice. This reveals a fundamental truth about reality. The universe is not made of observations or consciousness. It is made of matter and energy following physical laws. Consciousness is an emergent property that arises when matter configures itself in specific complex ways, but it is not fundamental. You can have a universe without consciousness, as was the case for most of cosmic history. You cannot have consciousness without a universe, without physical substrate and energy flows and causal processes. Consciousness depends on the universe. The universe does not depend on consciousness. When the last human dies, the universe returns to this default state. Not returns, really, because the universe never left that state. For almost all of space and time, no human consciousness exists. Humans are a local, temporary phenomenon, arising in one small region of one galaxy during one brief era. The universe is mostly empty of human consciousness. The last human's death simply closes the brief window when this one planet hosted minds capable of understanding cosmic reality. After the last human dies, stars will continue their life cycles. They will form from gas clouds, burn hydrogen for millions or billions of years, then end as white dwarfs, neutron stars, or black holes depending on their mass. This process operated before humans existed and will continue after humans are gone. The stars do not know humans existed. They do not mourn our passing. They simply continue being stars, following the laws of fusion and gravity that govern their existence. Galaxies will continue colliding. The Andromeda Galaxy is approaching the Milky Way at about 100 kilometers per second. In approximately 4 billion years, they will merge, their stars and gas clouds intermingling in a process that will take millions of years to complete. This collision was always going to happen. It does not matter whether humans are present to observe it. The gravitational dynamics that drive galaxy mergers operate independently of observation. The expansion of space will continue accelerating due to dark energy. Galaxies beyond our local group will recede faster and faster, eventually moving away at velocities exceeding the speed of light. As space expands between them, they will redshift into invisibility, disappearing beyond the cosmic horizon. Future intelligent species that might arise billions of years from now will observe a much emptier universe than we do, their observable region containing only their local group of gravitationally bound galaxies. The rest of the universe will have expanded away, forever inaccessible. Black holes will evaporate through Hawking radiation on timescales incomprehensibly longer than current cosmic age. A black hole with the mass of our Sun would take 10 to the power of 67 years to evaporate completely. Supermassive black holes in galactic centers would take far longer. But eventually, even these immense gravitational monstrosities will fade into radiation, leaving behind nothing but slowly dispersing photons in an ever-expanding universe. In the far future, perhaps 10 to the power of 100 years from now, the universe will reach a state called heat death. All stars will have burned out. All black holes will have evaporated. Matter will be dispersed so thinly that no new structures can form. The temperature will approach absolute zero. Nothing will happen anywhere, or rather, events will occur so slowly and be separated by such vast distances that the universe will effectively be frozen, static, dead. Human consciousness will not witness any of this. The last human will die billions of years before even the nearby stars burn out, let alone before the ultimate heat death. All of this future cosmic evolution will unfold in absolute unconsciousness, physical processes following deterministic laws with no minds present to observe or understand. The universe will continue its long slide toward maximum entropy without anyone caring or even knowing that it is happening. This is what cosmic indifference means. Not that the universe actively dislikes humans or wants us gone, but that the universe simply does not register our existence as significant in any way. We are a minor, temporary phenomenon, as cosmically irrelevant as the patterns in a puddle of water that exists for a few minutes before evaporating. The universe was here before us. It will be here after us. And it will proceed through its evolution entirely unconcerned with the fact that, for a brief moment, one species on one planet briefly understood what was happening. If the universe does not care about humanity, if our existence makes no difference to cosmic evolution, if our ending is cosmically insignificant, then what meaning can human life possibly have? This question has troubled philosophers for centuries, but it becomes especially urgent when contemplating the last human. They face the absolute confirmation that human existence was meaningless on a cosmic scale. Does this mean their life, and by extension all human lives, are meaningless? One response is to accept cosmic meaninglessness and construct meaning locally. Yes, the universe does not care, but humans care. We create meaning through our relationships, our projects, our values and goals. Meaning is not something inherent in the cosmos that we discover. It is something we generate through the act of caring about things. As long as humans exist and care, meaning exists, even if that meaning is fragile, temporary, and entirely dependent on conscious minds to sustain it. From this perspective, the last human still lives a meaningful life to the extent that they still care about things. If they care about survival, then their survival efforts have meaning. If they care about preserving human artifacts, then that preservation work has meaning. If they care about experiencing beauty, then seeking beautiful experiences has meaning. The meaning is subjective, existing only because they care, but subjectivity does not make it unreal. The last human's cares matter to them, and that is sufficient for meaning to exist during the time they remain alive. But this view faces challenges. Meaning constructed through caring seems to depend on the possibility that caring might accomplish something, that the thing cared about might be sustained or achieved. The last human's caring seems futile. They care about humanity's survival, but humanity will not survive beyond them. They care about preserving knowledge, but there is no one to pass that knowledge to. They care about experiencing beauty, but their experiences end with their death, leaving no mark on the universe. Their caring accomplishes nothing lasting. Does this futility drain their cares of meaning? Perhaps not. Perhaps meaning inheres in the act of caring itself, not in the outcomes that caring produces. The last human who spends their final days carefully maintaining a garden, knowing the garden will die shortly after they do, still experiences the meaning of gardening while they live. The beauty they create exists for as long as they perceive it. The care they express in tending plants reflects values that matter during the moments they are embodied in action. The fact that the garden will die does not retroactively destroy the meaning of the care given to it while it lived. This view suggests that meaning is moment by moment, existing in the present experience of caring rather than in any future consequences. The last human's life has meaning in the same way any human life has meaning, through the immediate experience of valuing things, making choices, engaging with the world. The fact that these values, choices, and engagements will soon cease, leaving no trace, does not diminish their reality while they occur. But many people find this unsatisfying. They want meaning to transcend the moment, to create lasting impact, to matter not just subjectively but objectively. They want their lives to make a difference that persists beyond their personal existence. The last human cannot have this kind of meaning. No matter what they do, it disappears when they die. No lasting difference is made. Nothing persists. From this perspective, the last human's life is the clearest possible demonstration of meaninglessness, the ultimate proof that nothing we do matters in any enduring sense. This leads to darker philosophical territory. If meaning requires lasting impact, and if the universe's indifference means nothing has lasting impact on cosmic scales, then perhaps meaning is impossible for anyone, not just the last human. Every human life ends in death. Every civilization ends in collapse. Every work of art eventually decays. the universe will reach heat death where no complexity or consciousness can exist. On a long enough timeline, everything humans do is erased just as thoroughly as the last human's actions will be erased. We are all, in a sense, the last human, living temporarily and accomplishing nothing that lasts forever. This recognition might lead to nihilism, the belief that nothing has meaning or value. But nihilism is difficult to sustain psychologically. Humans are built to find meaning. Our brains generate the experience of caring whether or not that caring has cosmic justification. We cannot help but value things, make choices, pursue goals, even when philosophical analysis suggests these activities are ultimately meaningless. The last human, despite intellectually recognizing their cosmic insignificance, would still experience hunger and seek food, still feel pain and avoid harm, still potentially experience joy and pursue it. Their biological and psychological nature generates meaning even in the face of philosophical nihilism. Perhaps the best response is to accept both truths. Yes, human existence is cosmically insignificant. The universe does not care. Everything we do is temporary and makes no permanent difference to anything. These facts are emotionally difficult but intellectually honest. We should acknowledge them rather than inventing comforting fictions about cosmic purpose or ultimate meaning. But we should also acknowledge that humans still care, that meaning exists subjectively even without objective foundation, that the experience of a meaningful life is real even if it is not cosmically significant. The last human would face this tension in its purest form. They know better than anyone that humanity does not matter cosmically. They watch the universe continue indifferently as the species ends. Yet they still feel hunger, fear, and possibly hope. They still make choices about how to spend their remaining time. They still, in some sense, care about their own life even while knowing it means nothing to anything but themselves. This is the human condition stripped of all comforting illusions, consciousness alone in a universe that does not notice it, caring despite the futility of caring, finding meaning in meaninglessness because biological and psychological nature makes meaning-seeking impossible to avoid. To truly grasp cosmic indifference, we must adjust our temporal perspective. Human lives measure time in days and years. Civilizations measure time in centuries and millennia. But the Earth measures time in epochs spanning millions of years, and the universe measures time in billions. From these longer perspectives, all of human history becomes nearly invisible, a brief flash in the vastness of deep time. Consider the geological record. Rocks preserve information about Earth's history through their composition, structure, and fossil content. Geologists can read this record to reconstruct ancient climates, continental movements, and biological evolution. But the record is incomplete. Many periods leave no traces. Entire ecosystems existed and disappeared without leaving detectable fossils. Brief events are lost entirely, compressed into single thin layers or simply absent from the record. How would humanity appear in the geological record? If all humans died today and some future intelligence excavated Earth millions of years from now, what evidence of our existence would they find? Cities would erode within tens of thousands of years, reduced to unrecognizable rubble. Most buildings would collapse, decay, and be buried or washed away. Metal objects would rust and disintegrate. Plastics might persist longer, but eventually even they would break down through oxidation and biological decomposition. Within a few 100,000 years, the surface evidence of human civilization would be largely gone. Some traces would persist longer. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing and accidents would remain detectable for millions of years. Changes to atmospheric composition, particularly increased carbon dioxide and methane, would leave geochemical signatures in ice cores and marine sediments. The mass extinction currently underway due to human activities would appear as an anomalous spike in extinction rates, similar to the 5 major mass extinctions in Earth's history. But these would be subtle signals, requiring sophisticated analysis to detect and easy to miss if you did not know to look for them. Fossils of humans themselves would be rare. Fossilization requires specific conditions, burial in sediment under anoxic conditions that prevent decomposition. Most human bodies are cremated or buried in coffins that delay but do not prevent decay. Few would fossilize. In the far future, researchers might find scattered human bones, perhaps enough to reconstruct basic anatomy, but the fossil record would be sparse. They would probably classify humans as a relatively uncommon large mammal that existed for a geologically brief period. From the perspective of geological time, humanity's existence is a blink. Homo sapiens has existed for 300,000 years. This is significant on human timescales but trivial geologically. It represents 0.007% of Earth's 4.5 billion year history. If Earth's history were compressed into a 24-hour day, modern humans would appear in the last second, and our entire history of civilization would occupy the last tenth of a second. We are not just insignificant on cosmic scales, but even on planetary timescales. The last human exists within this same compressed time frame. Their death ends humanity's brief appearance in Earth's history. Millions of years later, the evidence of our existence would be subtle and easily overlooked. Future intelligent species, if any arise, might study Earth's geological record without ever realizing that a technological civilization once existed here. They might find anomalous signals in the late Quaternary period, unusual isotope ratios and extinction patterns, but attribute them to natural causes rather than recognizing them as evidence of intelligence. This possibility is both humbling and oddly liberating. Humbling because it emphasizes how forgettable we are, how easily the evidence of our entire existence could be erased by geological processes operating over millions of years. But liberating because it removes the pressure to leave permanent marks. If the universe will forget us anyway, if geological time will erase even the most durable monuments, then perhaps we should stop worrying about legacy and focus on the present, on creating meaning and value now rather than trying to achieve impossible permanence. The last human might find some peace in this perspective. They know humanity is ending, but they also know that humanity was always going to be temporary. Species do not last forever. Civilizations do not endure permanently. The universe continues regardless. The last human's death simply completes a process that was inevitable from the moment the first human evolved. There is no failure in this ending because there was never any possibility of avoiding it. The last human is not responsible for humanity's extinction in any cosmic sense. They are simply the individual who happens to exist when the inevitable endpoint arrives. Looking further into deep time helps solidify this perspective. 1 billion years from now, the sun will be approximately 10% brighter than it is today due to gradual changes in its fusion processes. This increased luminosity will make Earth uninhabitable long before the sun actually dies. The oceans will evaporate. The atmosphere will be stripped away by solar wind. Earth will become a barren, lifeless rock orbiting a brightening star. No matter what humans do, no matter how long we manage to survive, Earth itself has a finite lifetime as a habitable world. Life on Earth is temporary by physical necessity. In 5 billion years, the sun will exhaust its hydrogen fuel and expand into a red giant. It will grow large enough to potentially engulf Earth, or at the very least heat Earth's surface to temperatures that vaporize rock. If humans somehow survived the earlier sterilization of Earth, if we evolved into forms that could withstand extreme conditions or escape to other worlds, we still face this ultimate fate of our home planet. The place where humanity evolved will be destroyed completely, leaving no trace that we ever existed here. From this perspective, humanity's extinction through being reduced to a last human who dies alone is simply an earlier version of what was always going to happen eventually. We do not persist until Earth becomes uninhabitable. We do not survive until the sun destroys our planet. We end sooner, through our own actions or through unfortunate circumstances, but the ultimate result is the same. Humanity ends. Earth continues for a while, then it ends too. The sun continues for a while, then it ends. Even stars are temporary. Even planets are temporary. Expecting humanity to be permanent is absurd when nothing else in the universe is permanent. This does not make the last human situation less lonely or less tragic on a personal level. They still experience the pain of absolute solitude. They still face the psychological burden of being the end of their species. But cosmically, geologically, they are simply one small part of an ongoing process of change and impermanence that characterizes all of reality. Their death is sad for them and meaningless to the universe, exactly like every other death that has ever occurred or will ever occur. The difference is only that theirs is the last human death, the one that closes a chapter in Earth's history that was always going to close eventually. Imagine the last human on an Earth approaching uninhabitability. Not through sudden catastrophe, but through the slow, inevitable brightening of the sun. Over hundreds of millions of years, solar luminosity increases. Temperatures rise. Oceans begin evaporating. The water vapor in the atmosphere creates a runaway greenhouse effect, trapping more heat, accelerating the warming. Eventually, Earth's surface becomes too hot for liquid water to exist. Life, which depends absolutely on liquid water, begins to die. This process takes place over timescales far longer than humanity has existed. But let us imagine that humans somehow survived for hundreds of millions of years, adapting to the slowly warming planet, migrating toward the poles as equatorial regions became uninhabitable, developing technologies to cope with increasing heat and decreasing water availability. They persist much longer than seems likely, but eventually even human adaptability reaches its limits. The last pockets of habitability disappear, the population declines, and finally one human remains. This last human exists on a dying world. The sun appears swollen and orange-red in the sky, far larger and brighter than in Earth's comfortable past. The temperature at the poles, the last refuges of life, hovers around 60 degrees Celsius. Higher temperatures kill most complex life. The last human survives in a sheltered location, perhaps underground where heat penetration is slower, perhaps in a structure built by previous generations to provide cooling, though the energy systems are failing. Water is scarce. The oceans have evaporated. The atmospheric water vapor gradually escapes to space, molecule by molecule stripped away by solar wind. The last human has access to some buried ice or water reserves, but these are finite and dwindling. They know that when the water runs out, survival becomes impossible. Humans cannot live without water for more than a few days. The countdown is measured not in years, but in remaining supplies of a substance that once covered 70% of Earth's surface. This last human might spend their time looking at the sky, watching the sun that sustained life for billions of years now destroying it. They would understand the physics. The sun's increasing luminosity is not malicious. It is simply the result of hydrogen fusion producing helium ash that accumulates in the core, changing the star's internal structure and energy generation rate. The process is natural, inevitable, operating according to the laws of stellar evolution. The sun does not hate life. It simply changes, and that change happens to be incompatible with maintaining conditions life requires. At night, when the surface cools slightly, the last human might emerge from their shelter. They would see stars, though fewer than were visible in the past because the thickening atmosphere and increasing water vapor scatter more light. Some of those stars might host planets where life still thrives. Perhaps some even host intelligent civilizations that will make different choices than humanity made, that will survive longer, that will spread beyond their home world and establish themselves among the stars. But the last human cannot reach those worlds. cannot send messages or receive comfort from knowing that life persists elsewhere. They are alone on a dying planet, the final representative of a species that failed to expand beyond its birth world before that world became uninhabitable. Their death, when it comes, would likely be from dehydration or heat stroke. The body's ability to regulate temperature fails when external heat exceeds what evaporative cooling through sweating can compensate for. Core body temperature rises. Organs begin to fail. Consciousness becomes confused, hallucinogenic. The last human might experience visions of water, of cooler times, of loved ones long dead. They might not realize they are dying because the brain no longer processes reality clearly. And then, after hours or days of declining function, the brain shuts down. The heart stops. The body, extremely hot, begins to decay rapidly in the heat. The universe continues. The sun keeps brightening. What remains of Earth's atmosphere continues escaping to space. A few 100 million years later, Earth is completely sterile, a bare rock with no atmosphere and no liquid water. Eventually, the sun exhausts its hydrogen fuel entirely and expands into a red giant, possibly consuming Earth in its outer layers. The planet that gave birth to life, that sustained it for billions of years, that witnessed the brief appearance and disappearance of human consciousness, ends as plasma in a dying star's atmosphere. No management, no memory, no significance whatsoever except as mass and energy redistributed according to physical law. Alternatively, imagine humanity succeeds in spreading beyond Earth. We establish colonies on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, in space stations throughout the solar system. We develop generation ships and send them to nearby star systems. For thousands or millions of years, humans exist throughout a portion of the galaxy, a spacefaring civilization maintaining contact across interstellar distances, sharing information and culture through radio signals that take years or decades to travel between colonies. Then disaster strikes. Not localized disaster, but something that affects all of humanity across all its scattered locations. Perhaps a deadly engineered virus that spreads through space travel, affecting every human population despite quarantine attempts. Perhaps a coordinated attack by a hostile intelligence, alien or artificial, systematically destroying human colonies one by one. Perhaps a technological failure in the life support systems we all depend on. A subtle design flaw that manifests catastrophically once components age beyond a certain threshold. Whatever the cause, human populations begin dying off. Colonies lose contact with each other. Distress signals go unanswered. The last messages from dying stations are desperate pleas for help that no one can provide. Over a period of years or decades, the human presence in space diminishes from millions of individuals in hundreds of locations to thousands, then hundreds, then dozens scattered across vast distances. The last human in this scenario exists in a functioning space habitat. Perhaps a research station orbiting a distant planet. Perhaps a generation ship between stars, still decades from its destination. They have power, life support, computer systems, all the technology of an advanced civilization. But they are utterly alone. They can send radio signals but know that no one is alive to receive them. They can access databases of human knowledge but have no one to discuss that knowledge with. They live surrounded by the machinery of civilization but lack the people that made civilization meaningful. This individual might survive for years. Space habitats are designed for reliability and have multiple redundant systems. Food can be grown hydroponically. Water can be recycled indefinitely. Power comes from solar panels or nuclear reactors with decades of remaining fuel. The last human in space might outlive the last human on Earth, protected by technology that isolates them from environmental hazards. But technology cannot protect them from loneliness. They would have access to recorded media, videos and audio of other humans, entertainment and education created before the disaster. They could watch millions of hours of human beings talking, laughing, living. But these are ghosts, recordings of people who no longer exist. The last human might find comfort in these recordings at first, maintaining the illusion of company by watching videos of humans interacting. Over time, this comfort would likely fade, replaced by pain as the recordings emphasize the absence of actual human connection. The space habitat would be silent except for the hum of life support systems and the sound of the last human's own movements. Humans are noisy creatures. We talk, laugh, shout, cry. A human community generates constant sound. The last human would experience silence unlike anything humans typically encounter, broken only by their own voice if they choose to speak to no one or by the mechanical sounds of the station. This silence would be oppressive, a constant reminder of solitude. Looking out the windows of their station, the last human would see space, stars, perhaps a planet below or distant galaxies above. They would know that somewhere in that vast darkness, human colonies once existed. Stations and settlements now dark and empty, their inhabitants dead, their machines slowly failing without anyone to maintain them. The ruins of human civilization scattered across light years of space, unreachable and irrelevant. The last human orbits in their functioning bubble of life support, surrounded by dead stations they cannot visit and empty space they cannot escape into. Eventually, something fails. A system breakdown, a collision with debris, or simply the accumulation of small malfunctions that can no longer be repaired by one person working alone. The station loses atmosphere or power or temperature control. The last human faces the choice of whether to attempt repairs they probably cannot complete or to accept that their time has come. If they choose acceptance, they might depressurize the station intentionally, dying quickly from vacuum exposure rather than slowly from suffocation or freezing. They might spend their final moments looking at stars, knowing they are the last human consciousness to observe this particular view of the cosmos. The universe would not care. This choice would be personally significant but cosmically meaningless. Whether the last human dies today by choice or in 10 years from failing systems or in 20 years from old age makes no difference to anything except that one individual's experience. The universe continues the same regardless. The ending is just as absolute. The only variable is whether the last human exercises agency over the timing and manner of their death or allows circumstances to determine these things. The moment of decision would be profound. They would choose not just their own death but the end of humanity. The timing of human extinction would be in their hands. They could delay it by continuing to live, or they could end it now by ending themselves. This is a weight no other human has ever carried. Every other suicide affects only the individual and their relationships. The last human's suicide affects the species, determines precisely when the human story concludes. There might be hesitation, even knowing that continuation offers no happiness, no connection, no purpose. Biological drives toward survival are powerful. The human body is built to avoid death, to fight for life instinctively. The last human might experience intense internal conflict between rational conclusion that death is preferable and biological imperative to continue living. They might attempt suicide and fail, survival instinct causing hesitation at the crucial moment. They might succeed in taking their life but experience regret in the final moments, though any such regret would die with them, leaving no trace or consequence. Or they might approach it with calm acceptance. They might prepare carefully, creating a peaceful environment, perhaps with music or beautiful views if such are available. They might spend time reflecting on their life and on human history, achieving some measure of peace with the ending. They might perform some final ritual, though for themselves alone, marking the transition from existence to non-existence with intentionality and awareness. And then they would act and consciousness would cease, and humanity would end by its last member's choice rather than by imposed circumstances. But is consciousness intrinsically valuable when it experiences nothing but suffering? The last human would likely endure extreme psychological pain from isolation, grief, and the knowledge of extinction. If their continued existence produces more suffering than joy, more pain than meaning, then perhaps choosing to end that existence becomes not just permissible but rational. Utilitarian ethics might even suggest that minimizing total suffering requires ending a life that will contain only negative experiences from this point forward. The last human contemplating suicide would face these philosophical questions directly. They would have time to think carefully about whether continuing to live serves any purpose. They might conclude that survival simply for its own sake, maintaining biological processes without any higher meaning or goal, is pointless. That it would be better to end consciously with dignity and choice, rather than continuing until injury, illness, or system failure ends them in potentially more painful ways. If they choose suicide, the method matters. Quick and painless would be preferable, but options might be limited depending on their circumstances. If they are on Earth, they might have access to medications or tools that would allow for relatively peaceful death. If they are in a space station, they might depressurize their environment, causing loss of consciousness within seconds and death within minutes from oxygen deprivation. They might write a final message, though they would know no one would read it, simply as a way of organizing their thoughts and asserting some control over their ending. There is another possibility that deserves consideration. Perhaps the last human chooses to end their own life deliberately, not from despair necessarily, but from a rational assessment that continuing has no purpose and only prolongs suffering. Suicide is a complex topic, but in the context of being the last human, it raises philosophical questions about obligation, meaning, and the ethics of continuing existence when existence offers no possibility of connection or contribution. The last human would have no ethical obligation to others to continue living because there are no others. Social contract theory grounds most ethical obligations in relationships and community. Without community, without the possibility of affecting anyone else, the last human exists in a space beyond most ethical constraints. They could choose to end their life without wronging anyone because there is no one to be wronged. Their survival benefits no one because there is no one to benefit. Yet most ethical traditions include some prohibition against suicide, often framed as a duty to oneself or a violation of the natural drive towards self-preservation that characterizes living things. From this perspective, the last human might still have an obligation to continue living simply because consciousness has intrinsic value, because experiencing existence is better than non-existence, because life itself carries meaning regardless of social context. Ending their own life would be wrong not because it harms others but because it destroys something valuable, the last instance of human consciousness. When they die, their body remains in the station, preserved by the vacuum of space or the cold of a failing heating system. The station continues orbiting, a tomb carrying the last human through space indefinitely. Thousands of years later, if the orbit is stable, the station might still exist, its systems long dead, its human occupant mummified, passing through space as a monument to a species that briefly reached for the stars and failed to maintain its grasp. No one will find it. No one will know what it represents. It will orbit until gravitational perturbations eventually cause it to deorbit and burn up, or until it is struck by debris and destroyed. The last human's body will be vaporized, atoms scattered, indistinguishable from the general matter of space. Let us explore in detail the most likely path to there being a last human. Slow environmental degradation that makes Earth increasingly uninhabitable over centuries or millennia. This scenario differs from sudden catastrophe in that it gives humanity time to watch its own decline, to understand what is happening, to make choices about how to respond. The last human in this scenario inherits a world that has been dying for generations. Climate change represents the most probable mechanism for this gradual fade. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events do not kill billions of people overnight. Instead, they make agriculture difficult, then impossible in many regions. They cause migration pressures as people flee uninhabitable areas. They strain resources and social systems beyond breaking points. Generation by generation, the human population shrinks not through mass death events but through declining birth rates, increased mortality, and the slow erosion of conditions that support large populations. Imagine Earth 300 years from now after centuries of temperature increase. The equatorial regions are largely abandoned, temperatures regularly exceeding what human physiology can survive even in shade with access to water. The mid-latitudes experience extreme variability, droughts followed by floods, agricultural seasons disrupted beyond reliable prediction. The polar regions, once frozen, have become temperate but chaotic, their ecosystems unstable as species from other latitudes migrate northward and southward seeking survivable conditions. Humanity's numbers have declined from billions to perhaps millions scattered in regions that remain marginally habitable. These populations are isolated from each other by hostile terrain and failed infrastructure. Global communication networks that once connected everyone have fragmented. Satellites have fallen from orbit without replacement. The internet, if it exists at all, is local and intermittent. Each community survives on its own resources, unable to trade or share knowledge with distant groups. The technology that sustained billions has degraded. Manufacturing requires supply chains that span continents. Specialized components come from factories in different countries, shipped globally, assembled into complex systems. When the population drops below the threshold needed to maintain these supply chains, technology begins to fail. At first, the failures are manageable. Old devices are cannibalized for parts. Simpler alternatives are developed. But over time, knowledge is lost. The last people who understood how to manufacture microchips die without passing on their expertise. The last functioning computers fail without replacement. This technological regression makes survival harder. Modern agriculture depends on machinery, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation systems powered by electricity or fossil fuels. As these systems fail, food production drops. Populations that had adapted to industrial agriculture cannot quickly relearn pre-industrial methods. Starvation reduces numbers further. The cycle accelerates. Fewer people mean less ability to maintain infrastructure, which means fewer people can survive, which means even less ability to maintain what remains. Social collapse accompanies physical decline. Governments lose legitimacy when they cannot provide security or resources. Law enforcement fails. Education systems break down. Medical care becomes impossible. Each generation is less educated, less healthy, more focused on immediate survival than on preserving knowledge or planning for the future. Cultural memory fragments. History is lost. Even the understanding that humanity was once numerous and powerful fades from collective awareness. In this scenario, the transition to the last human happens gradually over many generations. Communities shrink from thousands to hundreds to dozens. Eventually, just a few scattered groups remain, unaware of each other, each thinking they might be the last humans alive. One group persists slightly longer than others by chance or by being in a slightly more favorable location. Within that group, one individual outlives the rest through luck, health, or simple biological variation in lifespan. This last human might be born into a world where humanity has already declined to a few hundred individuals. They grow up hearing stories about when there were thousands, millions, billions of people, but these stories seem like myths. They watch their small community shrink through their childhood and adulthood. They help bury friends and family. They witness the failure of the last remaining technologies. They experience the transition from a struggling community to complete solitude. Their final years would be lonely but perhaps not shocking. The loneliness has been building for their entire life. They have been watching the end approach since they were young. When they finally realize they are alone, it confirms what they already feared. The grief is intense but not unexpected. They have been preparing emotionally for this moment, perhaps unconsciously, for years. They know what is coming. They have time to make peace with it, if peace is possible in such circumstances. This gradual path might be psychologically easier than sudden catastrophe because it allows for preparation, for gradual adjustment to loss rather than overwhelming shock. But it is also cruel in its drawn-out nature. The last human watches extinction approach for their entire life. They see it coming but cannot stop it. They live in the shadow of ending from birth to death, never knowing normal human life, never experiencing a world where extinction seems distant or avoidable. Their entire existence is colored by decline and impending termination. Now consider the opposite scenario. Sudden catastrophe that reduces humanity from billions to one within weeks or months. Nuclear war or pandemic represents this possibility. These scenarios produce a very different psychological experience for the last human because they lack the long preparation period of gradual decline. The last human in this scenario lived in a normal world just months ago. They remember when billions of people existed. They remember cities and technology and all the complexity of modern civilization. And then, suddenly, almost everyone died. A global nuclear war could unfold in hours. Thousands of warheads launched, arriving at targets within 30 minutes. Major cities destroyed instantly by blast and fire. Millions dead immediately. Millions more dying in subsequent hours from radiation, from collapse of infrastructure, from injuries without medical care. The electromagnetic pulses from high-altitude detonations fry electronic systems globally. Power grids fail. Communication networks go dark. Within a week, most survivors of the initial strikes are dead from radiation sickness, from inability to access food and water, from secondary effects of civilizational collapse. The survivors are those who happen to be in locations far from targets, shielded by geography or luck. Perhaps a few thousand people scattered across the planet. These survivors initially try to find others, to organize, to rebuild some semblance of society. But they face impossible challenges. The environment is devastated. Radiation makes many areas uninhabitable. The climate has been disrupted by the massive amounts of smoke and debris thrown into the atmosphere by fires in cities and forests. Temperatures drop as sunlight is blocked by particulate matter. Crops fail globally. Even survivors of the initial war face starvation and exposure. Over the following months and years, the survivor population drops rapidly. Without modern medicine, injuries and illnesses prove fatal. Without industrial agriculture, food becomes scarce. Small groups band together for mutual survival, but these groups are vulnerable. A single outbreak of disease, a shortage of firewood during a harsh winter, an unlucky accident, any of these can kill an entire group. The global population drops from thousands to hundreds to dozens. The last human in this scenario might have spent the first few years after the war in a small survivor community. They would remember the war itself, the terror of the first hours, the desperate attempts to understand what happened and find safety. They would remember the gradual realization that most of humanity had died, that the world they knew was gone forever. They would have formed close bonds with other survivors, relationships intensified by shared trauma and the necessities of survival. Then, over the course of years, they would watch their community shrink. People they loved would die from radiation-related cancers, from injuries that would have been treatable before but are now fatal, from diseases that medical care could have prevented, from simple accidents that become deadly when no help is available. Each death would be deeply felt because the community is small and every person matters. And eventually, they would be the last. The psychological impact of this sudden catastrophe would be severe. The last human would carry trauma from the war itself, from witnessing destruction on a scale beyond human comprehension. They would carry grief for billions of dead people, for a civilization destroyed in hours, for a future that was stolen in an instant of human madness. And they would carry the specific personal grief of losing their friends and community members one by one over years of struggle and suffering. This last human would likely experience severe post-traumatic stress, flashbacks to the war, nightmares, intrusive thoughts about the dead. They might question their own survival, experiencing survivor guilt on a species-wide scale. Why did they live when so many died? Was there something they could have done differently? These questions would have no good answers and would torture them with their unanswerable nature. The contrast between the world before and the world after would create intense cognitive dissonance. The last human would remember shopping in stores, driving cars, using computers, all the mundane technologies of modern life. They would remember crowds of people, the background noise of human activity, the sense of living in a populated world. But now they stand in silence, surrounded by ruins, with no possibility of accessing any of that former reality. The gap between memory and present circumstances would be psychologically devastating. Yet they would survive, at least for a time. Human resilience is remarkable. Even after unimaginable trauma, consciousness continues. The last human would find ways to cope, to maintain routines, to occupy their mind with the tasks of survival. They might speak to themselves, maintaining language through talking aloud. They might keep a journal, writing about their experiences even though no one will ever read it. They might create art, expressing emotions they cannot process verbally. These coping mechanisms would help them function despite psychological damage. Their death, when it comes, might be from suicide. The psychological burden of being the last human, combined with trauma from the war and years of isolation, might become unbearable. They might decide that continuing to live serves no purpose, that ending their suffering is preferable to enduring more years of loneliness and grief. Alternatively, they might die from accident or illness, their life ended by circumstances they cannot control. Either way, their death would be the culmination of years of suffering that began with the sudden catastrophe that destroyed their world. There is a stranger possibility that deserves exploration. Perhaps humanity does not end through death but through transformation. Perhaps we modify ourselves so extensively, through genetic engineering or technological augmentation or digital uploading, that we become something other than human. The last human in this scenario is not the last because everyone died, but because everyone changed into something else. This transformation might begin with medical therapies, genetic modifications to prevent disease, cybernetic implants to enhance cognitive function or physical capabilities, life extension treatments that dramatically increase lifespan. Each innovation promises to improve human well-being, to reduce suffering, to enhance capability. And initially, these technologies are used conservatively, treating illness rather than fundamentally changing human nature. But once the technologies exist, the pressure to go further becomes irresistible. If we can prevent genetic diseases, why not enhance intelligence? If we can replace damaged organs with artificial ones, why not upgrade healthy organs to be more efficient? If we can extend lifespan to 150 years, why not to 500? Each step seems reasonable. Each improvement is voluntary. Each change brings benefits that make the change attractive to more people. Over time, the definition of human becomes contested. Is someone with mostly artificial organs still human? Is someone with genetic modifications that improve memory and processing speed still human? Is someone who has uploaded their consciousness to a digital substrate still human? There are no clear boundaries. Each change is incremental, but cumulatively, these changes might produce beings that differ from baseline humans as much as humans differ from our evolutionary ancestors. Most people choose to change. The benefits are too compelling. Enhanced intelligence means better problem solving, more creative capacity, deeper understanding of reality. Increased lifespan means more time to learn, to experience, to accomplish goals. Digital existence offers advantages impossible in biological form: freedom from physical constraints, ability to back up consciousness, potential for experiences not available to biological minds. The transformed individuals are happier, more capable, living fuller lives than baseline humans can achieve. But some people refuse transformation. They value biological humanity, the specific form of consciousness that evolved on Earth over millions of years. They worry that transformation changes identity too much, that an uploaded consciousness is not the same being who was uploaded but merely a copy. They prefer limited biological lifespan to potentially eternal digital existence because they value the authenticity of biological experience. They remain human while others become post-human. Over time, baseline humans become increasingly rare. Each generation, more people choose transformation. The baseline human population shrinks through attrition and choice. Those who remain are aging, since they lack the life extension technologies others use. Eventually, only a few baseline humans remain in a world dominated by post-human intelligences. The last human in this scenario exists in a very strange situation. They are surrounded by conscious beings, by intelligences descended from or created by humans. But these beings are incomprehensible to biological human consciousness. They think thoughts that biological brains cannot formulate. They experience realities that biological senses cannot access. They communicate through interfaces that baseline humans cannot use. The last human is not physically alone but is experientially isolated because they cannot meaningfully interact with the post-human intelligences around them. This might be even lonelier than physical isolation. At least in physical isolation, you know other minds do not exist. The last human in the transformation scenario knows other minds exist but cannot connect with them. They are surrounded by consciousness but cut off from it by the limitations of their biological form. They might watch post-human beings interact with each other, sharing experiences and information at speeds and in modes incomprehensible to biological thought, and feel profoundly excluded, like being deaf and blind at a party where everyone else can hear and see perfectly. The post-human beings might try to help. They might create interfaces that allow limited communication with the last human. They might provide for the last human's physical needs, ensuring comfort and health. They might even honor the last human as the final representative of the biological form they descended from. But these efforts cannot bridge the fundamental gap. The last human remains isolated by the difference between biological and post-biological consciousness. When this last human dies, Homo sapiens ends biologically. But something that was human continues in post-human form. Is this extinction or transformation? The question has no clear answer. From one perspective, humanity survived by transcending its biological origins. From another perspective, humanity went extinct when the last biological human died, replaced by something new that merely descended from humans. The last human's perspective would probably favor the extinction interpretation. They would feel that what remains is not human, that their death marks the real ending of humanity regardless of what post-human beings claim about continuity. This scenario raises profound questions about identity and continuity. What makes us human? Is it our biological form, our DNA, the specific biochemistry of carbon-based life? Or is it our patterns of thought, our values and relationships, our capacity for consciousness and creativity? If we maintain the latter while changing the former, have we preserved humanity in what matters, or have we destroyed humanity while keeping only a pale imitation of what we once were? The last human, unable to participate in post-human existence, would embody the view that biological form matters, that you cannot change the substrate without changing the being in essential ways. The last human's absolute isolation reveals something crucial about human nature that we often overlook in our daily lives. We are not independent beings who happen to form societies for convenience. We are fundamentally social creatures whose very consciousness depends on connection with others. Understanding this through the lens of the last human's experience helps us appreciate what we have now, while we still have it, while other humans still exist to connect with. Every moment of human connection is precious not because of some mystical significance, but because connection is fragile and temporary. Every conversation you have could be the last conversation. Every person you know will eventually die. Every relationship will end through death, if not through other circumstances. We live constantly on the edge of loss, cushioned only by the fact that when one person dies, others remain. But this cushion is an accident of timing. We happen to exist during a period when billions of humans live simultaneously. This was not always true and will not always be true. For most of human history, populations were small. A few thousand individuals scattered across continents. Individual communities might number dozens or hundreds of people. Your entire world of possible human connection would be limited to those in your immediate area. Death of community members would be deeply felt because replacement was uncertain. Each person mattered enormously simply because there were so few people. The loss of even one individual represented a significant fraction of the available relationships. Modern life, with billions of people and global communication, creates an illusion of unlimited human connection. We assume that if one relationship ends, another can be found. If we lose touch with friends, we can make new friends. If we feel lonely, we can reach out through technology to access human contact anywhere on Earth. This abundance makes us complacent. We take connection for granted, assuming it will always be available because it always has been in our experience. The last human strips away this complacency. They reveal what we would face if connection became impossible. And while we will probably never be the last human individually, we all face the prospect of becoming increasingly isolated as we age. Friends and family die. Our social world gradually shrinks. Eventually, if we live long enough, we might find ourselves alone not because humanity has gone extinct, but because our particular social networks have dissolved through the attrition of death and distance. This should motivate us to appreciate and maintain the connections we have now. Not in some maudlin, sentimental way, but through practical recognition that other people are the primary source of meaning in human life. Everything significant in human experience involves relationships. Love, friendship, cooperation, teaching, learning, creating, appreciating. All of these depend on connection between minds. Remove other people, and life loses most of what makes it worth living. The last human would give anything to have one conversation with another person, to touch another human, to share a moment of understanding or laughter. They would trade whatever they possess for what we have in abundance. Other people who exist and can be interacted with. We should act accordingly. We should recognize that time spent with others, genuine attention paid to their experiences and thoughts, is the most valuable use of our limited time. Not because we will become the last human, but because we are social beings whose well-being depends on connection that we too often neglect or take for granted. This recognition does not require believing in cosmic significance or ultimate meaning. It is simply honest about what consciousness requires to function healthily. Solitary confinement is torture not because of physical discomfort, but because it violates human psychological needs for social interaction. The last human lives in permanent solitary confinement imposed by the structure of reality rather than by human captors. We should view our current situation, surrounded by other people we can potentially connect with, as the precious gift it actually is, and act to maintain and deepen connections while the opportunity exists. The last human's absolute confirmation of cosmic insignificance offers an unexpected gift. By demonstrating clearly that human existence makes no difference to the universe, that our presence or absence is cosmically irrelevant, The last human frees us from the burden of needing to matter on scales we cannot possibly affect. This should be liberating rather than depressing, though our initial emotional reaction might be dismay. Consider what changes if we genuinely accept cosmic insignificance. We no longer need to justify our existence through achievements that will outlast us. We no longer need to worry about leaving legacies that persist for thousands or millions of years. We no longer need to concern ourselves with whether the universe approves of our choices or whether we are living according to some cosmic plan. There is no cosmic plan. The universe does not approve or disapprove. We are free to live as we choose, answerable only to ourselves and each other. This freedom can be terrifying. Many people rely on beliefs about cosmic significance to provide structure and motivation. They want to matter not just to themselves but objectively, permanently, universally. The last human reveals that this desire cannot be fulfilled. No matter what humans accomplish, it disappears eventually. The universe continues unaffected. Everything we build returns to dust or plasma or dispersed atoms. If this is the standard for mattering, then nothing we do matters. But there is another way to think about mattering. Perhaps significance should be measured not by permanence but by impact on consciousness during the time consciousness exists. By this standard, acts of kindness matter enormously because they affect how conscious beings experience their existence. Creating beauty matters because conscious beings perceive and appreciate that beauty. Alleviating suffering matters because conscious beings experience less pain. The fact that these effects are temporary does not make them less real while they occur. The last human helps clarify this distinction. Their life clearly has no cosmic significance. Nothing they do affects the universe's evolution. No one will remember their actions. No legacy persists. Yet their experiences still matter to them during the time they remain conscious. Pain still hurts. Beauty still produces aesthetic pleasure, if any beauty remains accessible. The quality of their final days, whether painful or peaceful, matters experientially even though it matters to nothing else. If this is true for the last human, it is true for all humans. Your life does not need cosmic significance to be meaningful experientially. The joy you feel, the love you give and receive, the beauty you create or appreciate, the suffering you alleviate or cause, all of this matters in the moment of occurrence. It affects conscious experience. It changes the quality of someone's existence during the time they exist. The universe's indifference does not negate these effects. It simply confines them to the realm of subjective experience rather than objective cosmic significance. Accepting this confinement is liberating because it removes impossible demands. You do not need to change the universe. You do not need to achieve immortality or build monuments that last millions of years. You do not need to matter cosmically. You only need to affect consciousness positively, your own and others, during the brief window when consciousness exists. This is achievable. This is within your power. And this is sufficient for a meaningful life even though it is not sufficient for cosmic significance. The last human would understand this if they could achieve clarity through their isolation. They would recognize that mattering to the universe was never possible for any human. We all exist in the same cosmically insignificant position. The only difference is that most of us have other humans to matter to, while the last human does not. But the mattering between humans, the way we affect each other's conscious experience, is the only kind of mattering we ever had access to. The last human loses this when they lose all other humans. But for us, now, while others exist, this human-to-human mattering remains possible and represents the full extent of meaning available to our species. This should shift how we prioritize our lives. If cosmic significance is impossible and human significance is the only kind available, then activities that affect other humans positively become the most important things we can do. Spending time with people we care about, creating things others will enjoy, helping others suffer less or live better. teaching, learning, sharing experiences and perspectives. These activities do not change the universe's trajectory, but they change conscious experience, which is the only thing we could ever change in ways that matter to the beings we can affect. The last human dies knowing they are the end. But every human dies. Death is the one absolutely certain feature of every human life. In this sense, we all face endings similar to the last human's ending, just on different scales. Each of us is the last of our own consciousness. When we die, our personal universe ends just as absolutely as humanity ends with the last human. Understanding this parallel helps us think about how to live well despite inevitable endings. Death anxiety is common and natural. We evolved to fear death because fearing death promoted survival. But in modern contexts with extended lifespans and reduced immediate threats, death anxiety often becomes excessive and counterproductive. We spend enormous mental energy worrying about an event we cannot prevent, creating suffering through anticipation rather than through the actual experience of dying. The last human, knowing death approaches and brings species extinction with it, would face extreme death anxiety unless they could achieve acceptance. Philosophers have long argued that accepting death is necessary for living well. The Stoics taught that we should focus on what we can control and accept what we cannot. We cannot control whether we die. Death is inevitable. We can control how we live until death arrives. Therefore, we should invest energy in living well rather than in fearing death. The last human, stripped of all distractions and facing undeniable mortality, might achieve this acceptance through necessity. They have no choice but to accept death. Resistance accomplishes nothing. Acceptance at least offers the possibility of peace during remaining time. Most of us have more difficulty achieving acceptance because death feels distant and avoidable. We know intellectually that we will die, but we feel as if death happens to other people, not to ourselves, not yet, not today. This denial is psychologically protective in the short term but prevents us from living with full awareness of our mortality, which might paradoxically improve the quality of our remaining life. The last human cannot maintain this denial. Death is immediate, personal, and absolutely certain within a short time frame. This might force them into a more honest relationship with mortality than most humans achieve. There is a concept in existential philosophy called being toward death, introduced by Martin Heidegger. It suggests that authentic existence requires acknowledging that we are always approaching death, that our being is fundamentally finite and temporary. Most people live inauthentically, according to Heidegger, because they deny this finitude and live as if they will exist forever, following social conventions and pursuing goals that assume unlimited time. Authentic existence requires accepting death as the horizon that gives life shape and meaning precisely through its finality. The last human lives in an extreme version of being toward death. They cannot avoid awareness that death approaches and brings total ending. If Heidegger is correct, this should enable authentic existence. The last human, freed from social conventions by the absence of society, facing undeniable death, might achieve a clarity about existence that most humans never reach. They might recognize what actually matters in the moment because there is no future to project into, no past to romanticize, only the present experience unfolding until it stops. This suggests a way of living that we could adopt now without waiting to become the last human. We could live with awareness of mortality, not obsessively or morbidly but honestly. Acknowledge that time is limited. Recognize that this day, this moment, this interaction might be the last. Not to create anxiety, but to create appreciation. When you know something is temporary, you pay attention to it. You appreciate it while it lasts. You do not take it for granted or assume it will always be available. The last human would experience every sunrise, if they can still see sunrises, as precious because they know there are only a finite number remaining. They would experience every meal, every moment of comfort, every beautiful sight with intense awareness because scarcity creates value. we could adopt a similar awareness voluntarily. Recognize that there are only a finite number of sunrises you will see, meals you will eat, conversations you will have. You do not know which ones are the last, but you know they are all temporary. This knowledge should enhance experience rather than diminish it. Living well in the shadow of endings means making choices that create value during the time we have rather than chasing permanence we cannot achieve. The last human cannot create anything permanent. Their choices have no lasting consequences. This might free them to focus entirely on immediate quality of experience. Are they in pain? Can they reduce that pain? Are they experiencing beauty? Can they seek more beautiful experiences? Are they treating themselves and any remaining living things with respect? These immediate considerations become the only relevant ones when future impact is impossible. We face similar situations even though we are not the last human. Our actions might have slightly longer-term consequences than the last human's actions do, but on cosmic scales, the difference is negligible. Everything we build will be destroyed. Everyone we influence will eventually die. The effects of our actions propagate forward for a while but eventually disappear completely. If we take a cosmic perspective, we should focus on present quality just as the last human should, because the future impact of our actions is ultimately zero regardless of what we do. This does not mean ignoring consequences entirely. It means recognizing that the significance of consequences is confined to conscious experience during the relatively brief period before those consequences fade into insignificance. Helping someone matters because it affects their conscious experience positively. Harming someone matters because it affects their conscious experience negatively. These effects are real and significant to the beings experiencing them, but they are not cosmically significant, and they do not create permanent meaning. They simply create temporary value that lasts as long as consciousness persists to experience it. The last human, if they could achieve philosophical clarity, might recognize that they have lived exactly as every human lives. Temporarily, insignificantly, but nevertheless with the capacity for experiencing meaning in the moment. Their ending is not different in kind from every other ending, only in being the final one. And if they can face that ending with some degree of peace, accepting that consciousness ceases without cosmic tragedy, then they teach us that we too can face our endings with acceptance, living well despite mortality rather than living poorly through denial of mortality. Everything ends. Species, stars, galaxies. The universe itself will eventually reach a state where no complexity can exist, no consciousness can arise, no change occurs except on timescales so vast that they become indistinguishable from eternity. This is not pessimism. This is physics. This is the consequence of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, the mathematical certainty that closed systems evolve toward maximum disorder over time. Humans are temporary, not just individually but collectively. Our species will end, perhaps through self-destruction, perhaps through gradual decline as Earth becomes uninhabitable, perhaps through transformation into forms we would not recognize as human. But one way or another, Homo sapiens will cease to exist. The last human, whoever they are, whenever they live, will close the chapter on our species' brief appearance in cosmic history. This is difficult to accept emotionally. We want permanence. We want significance that lasts. We create religions and philosophies that promise immortality or cosmic meaning precisely because we struggle with the reality of impermanence. But the promise of permanence is false. Nothing lasts forever. Nothing escapes entropy. The universe offers no permanent meaning, no cosmic significance, no survival beyond the temporary patterns that consciousness creates and then dissolves. Accepting this requires surrendering hope for cosmic validation. It requires acknowledging that we matter only to ourselves, only during our brief existence, only in the subjective realm of conscious experience. This feels like loss. We are losing the comforting belief that we are important in some ultimate sense. But perhaps what we are actually losing is an illusion, and the loss of illusion is liberation even when it is painful. Consider what acceptance enables. If you accept that nothing you do has cosmic significance, you stop seeking cosmic validation. You stop trying to impress the universe or leave marks that will outlast the stars. You can focus instead on what is actually achievable, affecting conscious experience positively during the time consciousness exists. This is a more modest goal than achieving cosmic significance, but it is real, achievable, and sufficient for meaning even though it is not sufficient for permanence. The last human might achieve this acceptance through necessity. They have no alternative. They cannot avoid the truth that humanity ends with them, that nothing they do will change this, that the universe will continue indifferently after they die. They must either accept this reality and find peace within it, or spend their remaining time in anguish and denial that changes nothing. Most humans facing this choice would eventually choose acceptance simply because anguish is exhausting and futile. But we do not need to wait until we are the last human to practice acceptance. We can accept now that we are temporary, that our species is temporary, that everything we build will eventually be destroyed. We can accept that the universe does not care about us. These acceptances do not make life meaningless. They clarify what meaning is actually available and where we should focus our energy to create it. Meaning is in the present, in the quality of conscious experience happening now, in the connections between minds that currently exist, in the beauty we perceive today and the suffering we alleviate today. The future will take care of itself through physical processes we cannot control. The past is unchangeable. The only time we can affect is now, and the only things we can affect are the conscious experiences of beings existing now. This is sufficient. This is meaning enough. The last human, accepting that humanity ends with them, might spend their final days experiencing what remains, watching the sky, feeling the wind if wind still exists on their dying world, remembering people they loved. These simple experiences become their entire reality. There is nothing beyond them, no future to plan for, no legacy to worry about, just immediate experience unfolding moment by moment until moments stop. This is how every human should live, according to many philosophical traditions. Be present, experience fully, stop worrying about what you cannot control, accept impermanence, find meaning in the moment rather than in some imagined permanent significance. The last human is forced into this way of being by their circumstances. We can choose it voluntarily, benefiting from the clarity it provides without needing to lose all other humans first. Acceptance does not mean giving up or becoming passive. The last human might still take actions to maintain their well-being, to preserve beauty, to honor what was. These actions have meaning in the moment even though they have no lasting impact. Similarly, we can take actions to improve the world, to help others, to create beauty, not because these actions will echo through eternity, but because they affect conscious experience positively now. The impermanence of effects does not negate their value during the time they persist. Impermanence, despite feeling like a curse, is actually what makes experience valuable. If everything lasted forever, nothing would be precious. Scarcity creates value. The fact that time is limited is what makes time meaningful. The fact that connections end is what makes connections important. The last human understands this better than anyone. They know they have limited time, and this knowledge makes each moment significant. Consider how you value experiences differently when you know they are rare or ending. The last day of a vacation feels different from the middle days because you know it is the last. You pay more attention. You try to savor it. You feel both gratitude for having the experience and sadness that it is ending. This bittersweetness is beautiful in a way that endless vacation could never be. The ending gives the experience shape and significance. The last human experiences everything as a last. The last sunrise, the last meal, the last thought. This could be unbearably sad, and probably is painful. But it also means every experience carries the weight of finality, the significance of being the last time this particular type of conscious experience will ever occur for humanity. If the last human can achieve any psychological distance from their situation, they might recognize that this makes their final days more meaningful, not less, because they are experiencing what can never be experienced again. We can apply this lesson without being the last human. Recognize that every experience is temporary. Every conversation might be the last conversation with that person. Every sunset is unique and will never occur again in exactly the same way. Every moment is the last time you will experience that particular moment. This is always true, but we usually ignore it because we assume there will be more conversations, more sunsets, more moments. The last human does not have the luxury of this assumption. What would change if you treated each moment as potentially the last? Not in an anxious, desperate way, but in an appreciative, present way. You would pay more attention. You would be less distracted. You would value the experience more fully because you would recognize its impermanence. This is what impermanence teaches. That value comes from engagement with the temporary, not from grasping at the impossible permanent. The last human gives us this gift through their extreme situation. They show us what happens when impermanence becomes undeniable. They demonstrate that life can still have meaning even when ending is certain and approaching. They prove that consciousness can continue experiencing value even when that value is fleeting and soon to be erased. If meaning persists for the last human despite their impossible situation, then meaning certainly persists for us in our comparatively comfortable situations where we have other humans to connect with and more time remaining. There is something beautiful about endings, not because endings are good, but because they are honest. Everything ends. Facing this honestly, without denial or distraction, allows for a kind of clarity that is not available to those who pretend permanence is possible. The last human has ultimate clarity. They know exactly what is ending and when. There is no ambiguity, no false hope, no possibility of avoiding the truth. This terrible clarity might also be a gift, freeing them from the burden of uncertainty and allowing them to experience their final time with complete awareness of what it is. The ending. We shy away from endings. We avoid thinking about death, about loss, about the fact that everything we love will eventually disappear. This avoidance might reduce anxiety in the short term, but it also reduces engagement with life. If you never think about endings, you never fully appreciate what you have while you have it. The last human cannot avoid thinking about endings. Every moment is colored by awareness of impending conclusion. This might make them the most fully present human who ever lived, completely aware of what they are experiencing and of its temporary nature. Perhaps the greatest gift the last human can give us is this model of presence in the face of ending. They show that meaning does not require permanence. They show that value exists in experience even when experience is temporary. They show that consciousness can face its own ending and continue functioning, continue perceiving, continue finding moments of beauty or peace even in the darkest circumstances. If the last human can do this, then surely we can face our own much less dramatic endings with similar courage and presence. As this meditation draws to a close, as your consciousness drifts towards sleep, carry with you the lessons from the last human's impossible situation. You are not alone. Other humans exist. Other consciousnesses are available for connection. This is an extraordinary gift that you might take for granted but should treasure, because it is temporary and fragile, and someday, whether through your death or through more distant extinction, it will end. The universe does not care about you. This is liberation, not condemnation. You are free to create meaning through your connections with others, through your experiences, through the quality of consciousness you maintain during your brief existence. You do not need cosmic validation. You do not need to matter to the universe. Mattering to other humans, and having them matter to you, is sufficient for meaning even though it is not sufficient for permanence. Everything ends. You will die. Humanity will end. The earth will become uninhabitable. The sun will die. Even stars and galaxies are temporary. This is not reason for despair. It is simply truth. And facing truth allows for authentic living, for making real choices based on accurate understanding rather than comforting illusions. The last human faces truth in its starkest form. They show us that consciousness can endure even this ultimate truth without complete collapse. You are temporary. Your consciousness arose from physical processes and will dissolve back into physics when you die. But while you exist, while consciousness persists, experience has value. The joy you feel is real. The love you give and receive is real. The beauty you perceive is real. These experiences matter even though they do not last. They affect the quality of conscious experience during the time that experience occurs. This is meaning enough. The last human, if they achieve any psychological equilibrium, must live entirely in the present moment. They have no future to plan for beyond immediate survival. They have a past filled with loss that becomes increasingly painful to dwell on. The only time available to them in any meaningful sense is now, this moment, this immediate experience of being conscious and aware. This forced presence might be the last human's strange gift. Most humans struggle to be present. Our minds wander into past regrets or future anxieties. We half experience the current moment because we are mentally elsewhere. We eat without tasting food. We walk without noticing our surroundings. We talk to people while thinking about something else. This divided attention reduces the quality of experience. We are technically alive but not fully experiencing life. The last human cannot afford this divided attention. They have nothing to distract themselves with. No obligations pulling them toward the future. No community requiring their attention. Just immediate experience. The feeling of breathing, the sensation of hunger or fullness, the perception of light and color, the sound of wind or water or their own movements. These simple experiences become their entire reality because there is nothing else. In meditation traditions, this kind of presence is considered enlightenment or awakening. The ability to be fully in the present moment without mental distraction is presented as the highest achievement of consciousness. Yet the last human is forced into it through circumstances rather than through spiritual practice. They achieve presence not through wisdom but through having no alternative. Does this make their experience less valuable? Or does it suggest that presence has value regardless of how it is achieved? If you could cultivate this presence voluntarily, without needing to become the last human, you might discover that most of what you consider necessary for happiness is actually optional. The last human cannot have most of what we consider necessary. Other people, security about the future, purpose derived from contribution to something larger than yourself. Yet if they achieve presence, they still experience consciousness, still perceive reality, still potentially find moments of peace or beauty in the simple fact of existing. This should inform how we think about our own lives. We accumulate possessions, pursue achievements, build elaborate lives filled with complexity and distraction. We assume that happiness requires having many things and doing many activities. But the last human, stripped of everything except immediate experience, reveals that consciousness can persist and potentially even find some quality of peace with almost nothing. If they can experience moments of value with so little, perhaps we are overcomplicating our pursuit of well-being. This does not mean we should abandon everything and become ascetics. Human well-being does benefit from relationships, from having goals, from living in communities. But it does suggest that we might be placing too much emphasis on external conditions and too little on the quality of attention we bring to experience. You can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely if you are not present with them. You can have many possessions and feel empty if you are not attending to what you actually experience. Conversely, You can have very little and still experience richness if you are fully present to what little you have. The last human teaches this lesson through their extreme situation. They show that presence is not dependent on external conditions, that consciousness can be valuable even in the worst imaginable circumstances if awareness remains engaged with immediate experience. We can learn from this without waiting for catastrophe. We can practice presence now, choosing to pay full attention to whatever we are experiencing, cultivating the ability to be fully engaged with the present moment even when that moment is not extraordinary or pleasant. This practice does not require believing in any spiritual framework. It is simply a technique for improving the quality of conscious experience. When you eat, actually taste the food. When you walk, actually feel your body moving. When you talk to someone, actually listen to what they say rather than planning your response. These are simple practices that increase engagement with immediate experience, making life richer even if circumstances do not change at all. The last human, forced into presence by isolation, demonstrates that consciousness can endure and potentially even find meaning in the most minimal conditions. This should inspire us to explore what is possible with the much better conditions we currently enjoy. If they can find any quality of value in absolute solitude, we can certainly find meaning and well-being in our lives that still include other people and opportunities for connection and contribution. Their extreme situation clarifies what is essential, what can be preserved even when almost everything is lost. And what remains essential is consciousness itself, the simple fact of being aware and present to experience. As you drift toward sleep now, practice the letting go that the last human must ultimately master. Let go of the need for cosmic significance. Let go of the demand that your existence matter permanently. Let go of the belief that you can avoid death or that death is tragedy rather than natural process. Let go of the anxiety about endings. Let go of the resistance to impermanence. The last human has no choice but to let go of these things. They know with absolute certainty that they do not matter cosmically. They know death approaches. They know endings are inevitable. They cannot cling to illusions of permanence because reality forces the truth upon them. But you can choose to let go voluntarily, to accept what is true rather than fighting against it, to find peace in acceptance rather than exhausting yourself through resistance. Letting go does not mean giving up or becoming apathetic. The last human can still care about their own well-being, still make choices about how to spend remaining time, still experience preferences and desires. Letting go means accepting that outcomes are not ultimately within your control, that the universe will unfold according to physical law regardless of your wishes, that you can influence your immediate experience but cannot determine the larger trajectory of reality. This acceptance is difficult because it contradicts our evolved psychology. We are built to feel that we have control, that our actions matter, that we can shape outcomes through effort and planning. These feelings served our ancestors well because they motivated survival behaviors. But they also create suffering when we face situations we cannot control, like mortality and cosmic indifference. Learning to let go of the illusion of control is psychologically liberating even though it feels initially like loss. The last human shows us what complete letting go looks like. They let go of humanity because humanity ends with them. They let go of the future because there is no future beyond their remaining lifespan. They let go of meaning derived from contribution because there is no one to contribute to. They let go of identity tied to roles and relationships because all roles have ended and all relationships have been severed by death. What remains after all this letting go? Consciousness remains. Immediate experience remains. The present moment remains. These are the irreducible elements of human existence, what cannot be taken away as long as biological life persists. The last human, stripped of everything else, discovers what you discover when everything else is removed. That consciousness itself is the foundation, that immediate experience is the only reality you ever directly access, that the present moment is the only time that actually exists. This discovery should not wait until you are the last human or until you are dying. You can discover it now through voluntary letting go, through releasing attachments to permanence and control, through accepting impermanence and practicing presence. The last human's forced letting go can be your voluntary practice, transforming potential tragedy into chosen freedom, changing the loss of illusions into liberation from illusions. Sleep now. Let go of the day that has passed. Let go of worry about tomorrow. Let go of the need to be someone or accomplish something. Let go of the resistance to rest. Let consciousness drift into sleep, which is itself a kind of little death, a temporary cessation of awareness that you trust will be followed by awakening. This trust is not guaranteed by anything cosmic. You might not wake up. Death could come during sleep. But you let go anyway, allowing consciousness to cease temporarily, accepting the risk because rest is necessary and resistance is futile. The last human will eventually let go permanently, allowing consciousness to cease without expectation of awakening. This is harder than letting go into sleep because it is final. But the practice is similar. Release control. Accept what comes. Trust that letting go is easier than clinging. The last human's final letting go can teach you how to let go in smaller ways now, how to release without despair, how to accept endings without feeling that endings negate everything that preceded them. You are not the last human. You will wake from this sleep. You will have more days, more experiences, more opportunities for connection and meaning. But someday you will be the last of your own consciousness, facing the final ending that every human faces individually, even if not collectively. The last human's experience can prepare you for this personal ending by showing that consciousness can face its own cessation with some degree of peace, that letting go is possible even in the most difficult circumstances, that acceptance offers more comfort than resistance. Rest now. Let go now. Practice the small death of sleep so that you learn the art of letting go that will serve you throughout life and finally at life's ending. The last human is your teacher in this art, showing through their impossible situation what is possible for consciousness when forced to face ultimate truth. Learn from them, practice letting go, and find in this practice a strange peace that does not depend on circumstances, that persists even when everything else is lost, that reveals the resilient core of consciousness that survives all losses until consciousness itself finally ends. In the final analysis, there is only this moment, this immediate now where consciousness exists and experiences. The past is memory, which exists only as neural patterns in the present. The future is imagination, which exists only as neural activity now. The only time consciousness actually inhabits is this present moment, always now, never then or later, eternally returning to this single point of immediate experience. The last human lives in eternal now because they have no meaningful past to return to mentally and no future to project into. All their moments are equally present, equally this immediate experience of being conscious. They cannot escape into memory or fantasy. They must be here, now, experiencing whatever this moment contains. This could be torture if the moment is painful, but it could also be a strange liberation if they can accept the moment as it is rather than wishing it were different. You have the same relationship to time whether you realize it or not. You only ever experience this moment. When you remember the past, you are experiencing memory now. When you anticipate the future, you are experiencing anticipation now. The past and future are mental constructs existing in present consciousness. The actual territory of your experience is always and only now. But most people do not realize this. They feel spread across time, pulled by memories and pushed by plans, divided between what was and what might be. They experience the present moment as just one moment among many rather than as the totality of experiential reality. This creates a sense of continuous identity persisting through time, but it also creates suffering as consciousness resists the present moment in favor of desired futures or mourned pasts. The last human, forced into the present by circumstances, experiences what mystics claim to discover through meditation: that there is only now, that past and future are concepts rather than realities, that peace comes from accepting this moment rather than fighting against it. They did not seek this realization. It was forced upon them. But if the realization is valid, it might bring some comfort even in their terrible situation. If you can realize this voluntarily, if you can recognize that you only ever experience this present moment and that fighting against this moment creates unnecessary suffering, you might discover what the last human discovers through necessity: that presence is possible, that this moment can be accepted, that consciousness does not need to be scattered across imagined time but can rest in the reality of now. This does not mean ignoring past or future entirely. You can remember and plan without losing presence. You simply recognize that remembering and planning are activities happening now, thoughts occurring in present consciousness. You can think about past or future while remaining aware that you are thinking these thoughts now, that the actual experience is present even when the content of thought is temporal. The last human cannot think meaningfully about future because they have no future, but they can be present to the experience of thinking, to the sensation of consciousness formulating thoughts and observing those thoughts. If they achieve this meta-awareness, if they can observe their own consciousness in operation rather than being entirely identified with thought contents, they might find a kind of peace that transcends their circumstances. This peace would not be happiness in any conventional sense. The last human situation is objectively terrible, but peace is different from happiness. Peace is acceptance of what is, the ceasing of struggle against reality. The last human can be at peace with their situation even while recognizing that it is sad and difficult. Peace does not require that circumstances be good. It requires only that you stop fighting against what actually is and instead meet reality where it stands. You can cultivate this peace now, in your much better circumstances. Notice this moment, this breath you are breathing now, these sensations in your body now, these thoughts arising in consciousness now. All of this is the present moment, the only moment you ever actually experience. Past and future are thoughts about moments, but actual experience is always now. When you rest in this recognition, when you stop fighting against this moment and simply allow it to be exactly what it is, you touch the same peace the last human might touch. Their moment is different from yours, much more difficult, but the structure is the same. Consciousness experiencing now. And in that present experience, there is possibility for peace, for acceptance, for letting go of struggle. As consciousness fades now into sleep, let it fade from this recognition of present moment awareness. You are not going anywhere. You are simply ceasing to be conscious for a time. And when consciousness returns, it will return as now, as present moment experience, the same eternal now you are experiencing as you fall asleep. The last human's final moment will be now. Your final moment will be now. Every moment of every life is now. This is the eternal truth that circumstances cannot change. Rest in this truth. Let consciousness dissolve from present moment into sleep. And know that the last human, alone in their impossible situation, is not separate from you in the fundamental structure of experience. You both inhabit the same now, the same immediate experience of consciousness, the same present moment that is the only moment that ever was or will be. You are connected in this if in nothing else. The present moment is universal, the shared ground of all consciousness, the meeting place where even the most isolated being touches the same reality you touch now. There is a final paradox that the last human helps us understand. We need to matter, yet we cannot matter cosmically. This creates tension that we must learn to live with, a tension between our psychological need for significance and the reality that the universe does not provide significance. The last human experiences this paradox in its most extreme form, and their experience clarifies something important about how to navigate it. The need to matter is not optional. It is built into human psychology. We are social animals who evolved in groups where status and contribution mattered for survival. Our brains are wired to seek significance, to want to be valued by others, to contribute meaningfully to something larger than ourselves. This drive cannot be simply turned off through rational argument. You cannot convince yourself to stop caring about mattering any more than you can convince yourself to stop feeling hungry. But the universe does not care. Physical processes unfold according to mathematical laws that have no awareness of human concerns. Stars do not care about human meaning. Galaxies do not register human significance. The expansion of space proceeds whether or not consciousness exists to observe it. On cosmic scales, human existence is irrelevant. We might as well have never existed for all the difference it makes to the universe's evolution. These two truths, psychological need for significance and cosmic absence of significance, create paradox. We need to matter but cannot matter in the way we want to matter. What do we do with this contradiction? We cannot resolve it. We cannot make the universe care. We cannot eliminate our need to matter. We must somehow live with the tension between need and reality. The last human shows one way to navigate this paradox. They matter to themselves. Their experiences have value to them. Their choices affect their own consciousness. They cannot matter to others because others do not exist, but they can still matter to themselves. This self-directed significance is limited compared to the social significance most humans seek, but it is real and achievable even in the most isolated circumstances. Perhaps this is the resolution to the paradox. We matter locally to ourselves and to each other, even though we do not matter cosmically. Local significance is not cosmic significance, but it is the only kind of significance actually available. The universe cannot validate our existence, but other conscious beings can, and ultimately we can validate our own existence through the choices we make about how to experience our brief time being conscious. This shifts the question from "do we matter?" to whom do we matter? We do not matter to the universe. We do matter to each other and to ourselves. Accepting this limitation allows us to focus energy on the forms of mattering that are actually possible rather than exhausting ourselves seeking cosmic validation that will never come. The last human matters to no one but themselves. This is tragic because it represents the loss of social significance that humans normally derive from relationships and community. But even the last human still matters to themselves. Their experiences still have value to the consciousness experiencing them. They still make choices that affect the quality of their remaining life. This minimal form of mattering might be all that remains when everything else is stripped away, but it is still something rather than nothing. For those of us who are not the last human, who still have other people to matter to and to be mattered to by, the situation is much better. We can matter socially. We can matter to friends, family, community. We can contribute to projects larger than ourselves. We can create things that other people will value. All of these forms of significance are available as long as other humans exist. They are not cosmic significance, but they are real and meaningful and sufficient for psychological well-being. The paradox dissolves when we stop demanding cosmic significance and accept that local, temporary significance is the only kind available. We are cosmically insignificant and locally significant. Both are true simultaneously. There is no contradiction once we understand that significance is relative to the observer rather than absolute. We do not need to matter to the universe. Mattering to conscious beings, including ourselves, is enough. The last human, mattering only to themselves, lives with the minimal viable version of this truth. They demonstrate that even when reduced to self-directed significance alone, consciousness can persist and potentially find some form of peace. If this minimal significance sustains the last human, then surely the much richer forms of significance available to those of us with social connections are more than sufficient. We should stop worrying about cosmic significance we cannot have and appreciate the local significance we do have. This appreciation should manifest practically. Treat the people in your life as significant because they are significant to you, which is the only kind of significance that matters. Value your own experiences because they matter to you, which makes them matter in the only sense that is coherent. Stop seeking validation from an indifferent universe and start recognizing the validation that conscious beings can give each other through attention, care, and recognition of each other's experiences. The last human cannot receive validation from others because others do not exist. But you can. This ability to validate each other, to make each other's experiences significant through witness and care, is perhaps the most important capacity humans possess. It is what creates meaning in a meaningless universe, significance in cosmic insignificance, matching where the universe offers no inherent matching. We began this journey contemplating timescales. 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, watching the timeline expand until humanity's extinction becomes visible on the horizon. We traced paths by which the last human might come to exist, scenarios of gradual decline or sudden catastrophe or strange transformation. We explored the psychology of absolute solitude, the cosmic indifference that makes human existence insignificant on universal scales, and the local significance that makes human existence meaningful on human scales. Now, as the circle completes, as this meditation prepares to release you into sleep, what should you carry forward? What matters from this long contemplation of ending and insignificance? Not depression, hopefully, not despair at cosmic meaninglessness. Instead, clarity, understanding, liberation from impossible demands and appreciation for possible meanings. You are temporary. This is not tragedy. This is simply truth. Everything is temporary. Impermanence is the fundamental nature of reality at every scale. Accepting this does not diminish the value of experience. It clarifies what can be valued and how to value it. Value the present moment because it is the only moment you experience. Value connection with others because connection is the primary source of human meaning. Value consciousness itself because consciousness is the capacity that makes any valuing possible. The last human loses connection with others but retains consciousness and present moment experience. This reveals the hierarchy of what matters. Connection enhances meaning but is not absolutely necessary for consciousness to persist. Consciousness experiencing the present moment is the irreducible minimum, the foundation that remains when everything else is lost. As long as consciousness persists, existence has some quality of value even if that value is diminished by isolation and impending ending. You have more than the last human has. You have other people to connect with. You have a future that extends beyond immediate survival. You have community, purpose, the possibility of contribution. These are extraordinary gifts that only seem ordinary because you have always had them. The last human's deprivation makes visible what you might otherwise take for granted. Use this visibility to appreciate what you have. But do not take comfort in feeling superior to the last human situation. You are not fundamentally different. You face the same ultimate ending that they face. Your consciousness will also cease. Your connections will also be severed by death. Your purposes will also be rendered meaningless by the eventual heat death of the universe. The difference between you and the last human is only one of timing and degree. They face immediately what you face eventually. Their aloneness is absolute while yours is relative. But the structure is the same. You are both temporary consciousnesses experiencing a brief window of awareness in an eternal universe that precedes and follows that awareness with perfect indifference. This recognition should create solidarity rather than separation. The last human is not alien to you. They are you in slightly different circumstances, facing in extreme form what every human faces in diluted form. Their struggle with isolation is your struggle with the limits of connection. Their confrontation with meaninglessness is your confrontation with cosmic indifference. Their forced acceptance of mortality is the acceptance you must eventually achieve. You are kin to the last human in the ways that matter most, fellow travelers in the journey of consciousness from emergence to cessation. If you can feel this kinship, this connection across time and circumstance to the last human, then you can extend that same connection to every other human who lives or has lived or will live. All of you are temporary. All of you are insignificant cosmically. All of you are significant locally and experientially. All of you matter to each other in the only ways that matching is possible. This shared condition, this common fate, should create empathy rather than division, solidarity rather than competition. The last human stands at the end of this common fate, the final expression of what every human is. They are alone but not separate from the whole story of humanity. They are the last sentence in a very long book, but they belong to that book, are part of that narrative, complete what began with the first humans millions of years ago. And when they die, when consciousness ceases for the final time in a human form, something is completed. Not accomplished, because completion is not achievement, but finished. The circle that began with the first human closes with the last human. The story that started with primitive consciousness developing in primate brains ends with sophisticated consciousness ceasing in the final descendant of those primates. Is this sad? Yes. Is this meaningful? No, not cosmically. But is it real? Absolutely. The last human's experience will be as real as your experience is now, as vivid, as immediate, as utterly present in the moment of its occurrence. Their suffering will hurt just as much as suffering hurts you. Their moments of peace, if any come, will be just as peaceful. Their consciousness will be just as conscious. The universe's indifference does not make their experience unreal. It simply confines that experience to the subjective realm where all human experience has always existed. And when it ends, when the last human's consciousness ceases, the universe continues exactly as it would have if humans never existed. Stars keep burning. Galaxies keep colliding. Space keeps expanding. The physical processes that created conditions for consciousness continue operating, perhaps eventually creating consciousness elsewhere in the universe, perhaps not. Either way, the universe proceeds and humanity's chapter in cosmic history closes, and nothing of cosmic significance has changed. But something experientially significant has ended. A particular form of consciousness, the human form, ceases to exist. The specific way that matter organized itself to become aware on Earth, the peculiar flavor of human awareness with its language and art and science and love, disappears. Other forms of consciousness might exist elsewhere, but they will not be human consciousness. When the last human dies, something genuinely unique is lost, even if the universe does not notice the loss. You are part of that unique thing. Right now, in this moment, your consciousness is an instance of human awareness. You are experiencing what it is like to be human, adding your particular perspective to the collective phenomenon of human consciousness. When you die, your particular instance ends, but humanity continues in others. The last human has no such continuation. Their ending is absolute. They are the final instance. After them, nothing. This should make you appreciate your current instance while it lasts. You are not the last human, which means your ending is not the species ending. Others will continue after you. The project of human consciousness persists beyond your individual cessation. This is comforting in a way that the last human cannot access. Your death is personal tragedy, but not cosmic or species-level tragedy. The last human's death is all three simultaneously: personal, collective, and cosmic, in the sense that it ends one of the universe's experiments in consciousness. Imagine the last human's final breath. They know it is the last, or perhaps they do not know, consciousness fading without clear awareness that this is the end. Either way, the breath is final. Air moves in, air moves out, and then no more air moves in again. The lungs stop, the heart stops, the brain, deprived of oxygen, ceases electrical activity within seconds. Consciousness flickers and goes out. The last human is dead. What happens in that final moment of consciousness? What does the last human experience as awareness ceases? We cannot know. No one who has died can report what death is like. But we can imagine. We can think about what neurological shutdown might feel like subjectively, what the last moment of awareness might contain. Perhaps there is fear. The primal animal fear of death that evolution built into all living things. The body's desperate attempt to continue, to breathe, to preserve itself. The last human might die fighting against death, consciousness clinging to existence even as biological systems fail. This would be a hard death, full of struggle and terror, consciousness resisting its own cessation until the very end. Or perhaps there is acceptance. The last human might have achieved peace with their ending, might have let go of resistance, might welcome death as release from isolation and struggle. Their final moment might be calm, awareness fading gently like falling asleep, consciousness releasing its grip on existence without fight or fear. This would be an easier death, though whether easier deaths are better is a question without clear answer. There might be confusion, consciousness degrading, unable to maintain coherent thought, experiencing the breakdown of cognitive systems that have sustained awareness throughout life. The last human's final thoughts might be chaotic, fragmented, incomprehensible even to themselves. Awareness might dissolve into nonsense before it dissolves into nothing. This would be a confused death, neither accepting nor resisting but simply failing as biological systems fail. Or there might be clarity. Some dying people report moments of exceptional clarity just before death, a final surge of awareness as if consciousness gathers itself one last time before ceasing. The last human might experience this, might have a final moment of crystalline consciousness where everything becomes clear, where they understand their life and humanity's story and the nature of existence with perfect comprehension. This would be a gift, an unlikely grace at the very end. Whatever the subjective quality of that final moment, the objective result is the same. Consciousness ceases. The electrochemical processes that created awareness stop. The brain becomes an inert object, a complex structure that no longer functions. The last human's body begins to decay, atoms dispersing, returning to the environment from which they were temporarily organized into living form. Within hours or days, there is no meaningful distinction between the last human's body and the surrounding matter. They have become part of the general stuff of the universe, no longer a separate entity, no longer a locus of consciousness. And the universe continues. The planet keeps rotating. The sun keeps burning. The stars keep shining. Nothing has changed from the universe's perspective because the universe has no perspective. Physical processes continue according to mathematical law, unaware that consciousness has ended, indifferent to whether consciousness exists or not. The last human's death is no more cosmically significant than the death of a bacterium or the collapse of a star. It is simply matter rearranging itself according to physical law. But from the experiential perspective that just ended, everything has changed. The last human's universe, the phenomenal reality they experienced as consciousness, has ceased to exist. All their memories, all their experiences, all their understanding has vanished. Not just become inaccessible, but actually ceased to exist in any form. The patterns in neurons that encoded memories dissolved. The processes that created awareness stopped. There is no continuing experience in any other realm or form. The last human is simply gone. This is the ending you will face as well, not as the last human but as an individual human. Your consciousness will cease in the same way. The specific circumstances will differ, but the essential process is identical. Biological systems will fail. Electrochemical processes will stop. Consciousness will cease. And from your perspective, your universe will end just as completely as the universe ends for the last human. The difference is only that other humans will continue after you, while no humans continue after the last human. Does this make your death less significant? Or more? Perhaps neither. Perhaps each death is absolutely significant from the perspective of the consciousness ending and absolutely insignificant from the cosmic perspective. The last human's death and your death are equivalent in the structural sense, both carrying maximum experiential significance and zero cosmic significance simultaneously. This is the truth you must face. The last human faces it in isolation, but you face the same truth in community. Death ends consciousness. Your subjective universe ceases. Everything you are disappears. But life continues for others. Meaning continues to be generated by other consciousnesses. The universe continues its evolution without you. Your ending is absolutely final for you and nearly invisible to everything else. Can you accept this? Can you face your own mortality with the same unflinching acknowledgement that the last human must face theirs? This is not morbid dwelling on death, but honest recognition of reality. You are temporary. Death approaches. Consciousness will cease. These are facts, not opinions or possibilities, but certainties. The only unknown is timing and manner. The ending itself is guaranteed. If you can accept this, if you can look directly at mortality without flinching or denying, you might discover what the last human discovers. That acceptance brings peace. That resistance creates suffering. That consciousness can endure awareness of its own impending cessation without collapse. That you are capable of more honesty and strength than you might believe. That death, while unwelcome, is not the tragedy that resistance to death makes it seem. Now sleep. Let consciousness fade into rest. Practice the small ending of sleep that rehearses the larger ending of death. You will probably wake, but you release control over whether you wake. You trust the process. You let go. This is what the last human must do, what every dying human must do, what you will do when your time comes. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight you sleep and wake. Tonight you are still alive, still conscious, still connected to other humans. Tonight the last human is somewhere in the future, not you, not now. You have time remaining. Use it well. Live with awareness of mortality without being paralyzed by that awareness. Value what you have while having it. Connect with others while others exist. Be present to experience while experience continues. The last human is your teacher. They show you what consciousness faces in extreme form so you can understand what consciousness always faces in diluted form. They demonstrate that meaning persists even in meaninglessness, that presence is possible even in the worst circumstances, that consciousness is resilient enough to endure even the truth of its own impermanence and insignificance. Learn from them. Live knowing that you are temporary. Love knowing that love is temporary. Be present knowing that presence is temporary. And when your end comes, whether as the last human or as one of billions, face it with the acceptance they must achieve, the letting go they must master, the courage to cease without demanding that cessation be anything other than what it is, the natural end of a temporary pattern of awareness that briefly emerged from the universe and now returns to it. Good night. Sleep well. And when you wake, remember, you are not the last human, and that is a gift beyond measure. Use it wisely while it lasts.